The ambush erupted at 0 for 30 in the mountain pass, muzzle flashes tearing through the darkness as Lieutenant Sarah Chen's reconnaissance team scattered into the rocks. Her radio crackled with fragmented calls from her 4 squad members before small arms fire drowned out their voices. She pressed against cold stone, watching insurgents swarm the kill zone below, where Sergeant Morrison and 3 specialists were pinned down, their return fire diminishing as they ran low on ammunition. Chen calculated her options in seconds. The ridge offered concealment, but no shot at rescuing her team. The valley floor meant certain capture. Her left shoulder burned where shrapnel had torn through her vest, warm blood soaking her uniform as she watched Morrison make his final stand. The sergeant went down fighting, and Chen's chest tightened as insurgents dragged him and the 3 specialists from cover, binding their hands while a tall commander in clean fatigues observed from a technical truck. She slipped higher into the rocks, training overriding emotion as she established an overwatch position 300 meters above the ambush site. Through her scope, Chen studied the commander's face, noting his deliberate movements and the way his fighters deferred to his authority. This wasn't some random militant group. The discipline, the coordinated positions, the tactical patience all spoke to professional military experience now turned against its teachers. The commander surveyed the killing ground, then raised his eyes toward the ridgeline where Chun lay hidden among the boulders. His gaze swept across her position without stopping, but something in his posture suggested awareness that not all Americans had been captured. He spoke to his second-in-command, gesturing at the mountains, and Chun read the body language clearly. They knew she was out there. Morrison stirred as insurgents hauled him to his feet, blood streaming from a head wound. The 3 specialists, Gomez, Park, and Williams, were conscious but clearly injured. Their tactical postures collapsed into the exhausted slump of soldiers who knew their situation had turned critical. Chen's finger moved to her trigger, calculating the wind, the distance, the angles required to drop the commander and create chaos for an extraction attempt. Before she could fire, the commander drew his sidearm and placed it against Morrison's temple. His voice carried up the mountainside in accented English. "Your hidden soldier has 30 seconds to surrender, or I execute this sergeant." Chen's breath caught. The commander wasn't guessing. He'd counted the team size from their equipment signatures, knew exactly how many Americans had been in the kill zone, and understood one remained free. She watched through her scope as the commander began counting, his voice steady and theatrical. 25 seconds. Morrison locked eyes with Williams, shaking his head slightly in the universal signal to stay hidden, to complete the mission, to survive. 20 seconds. The commander's men spread out, weapons ready, scanning the ridgeline with disciplined fire sectors that demonstrated training beyond typical insurgent capabilities. Chen's mind raced through tactical options. A shot would kill the commander, but trigger immediate execution of her entire team. Staying hidden meant Morrison's death and gave her no chance to rescue the others. Extraction was impossible without air support, and their position was too hot for helicopters until dawn at earliest. The math was brutal and clear. 15 seconds. She secured her rifle, checked her sidearm, and began moving down the slope. Morrison was shouting now, ordering her to stay put, to let him die, to get word back to command. The 3 specialists added their voices, pleading with whoever remained hidden to run. 10 seconds. Chun emerged from the rocks with hands raised, her weapon slung across her back in surrender position. The commander smiled as she descended into the firelight of burning vehicles. His satisfaction showed in the way he holstered his weapon and gestured for his fighters to secure her. So the Americans do value their soldiers enough to trade victory for sentiment. How wonderfully predictable. His English carried British influence, suggesting education abroad before whatever path had led him to these mountains. Chun said nothing as rough hands stripped her gear, confiscated her weapons, and bound her wrists with plastic restraints. She studied faces, counted fighters, noted weapon types and ammunition loads while Morrison swore at her for throwing away her freedom. The commander circled her slowly, examining her equipment with the eye of someone who understood its significance. Customized rifle, specialized optics, encrypted communications gear. You're not standard infantry, Lieutenant. He lifted her dog tags, reading them in the flickering light. Sarah Chun, I am Hassan, and you have just made my month considerably more interesting. His men loaded the captured Americans into a truck while Hassan continued his inspection, finding the reconnaissance specialist tabs on her uniform, the worn grip tape on her confiscated rifle that spoke to thousands of practice rounds. He looked genuinely pleased as he ordered the convoy to move out. The drive to his compound took 40 minutes on mountain roads that wound through territory clearly under insurgent control. No Afghan military, no coalition patrols, just Hassan's fighters manning checkpoints and waving the convoy through with casual familiarity. Chun memorized every turn, every landmark, every tactical feature of the terrain while the three specialists slumped in exhausted silence, and Morrison glared at her with fury born from gratitude he didn't want to feel. Hassan's compound occupied a former mining facility, stone buildings arranged around a central courtyard with clear sight lines and defensive positions that demonstrated someone understood military architecture. Guards patrolled with discipline, weapons maintained, uniforms relatively clean. This wasn't desperation, it was organization. Hassan led his prisoners to a storage building and had them placed inside with their hands still bound, then departed without explanation. For an hour they sat in darkness, hearing occasional voices outside, but unable to determine what fate awaited them. Morrison finally broke the silence, his voice tight with anger and something else Chun recognized as fear being channeled into rage. You threw away our only chance. Chun met his eyes in the dim light filtering through cracks in the walls. I gave us a chance. If I'd stayed hidden, you'd be dead and I'd still be one soldier against 50. Now we're 4 soldiers and we're still breathing. Park spoke quietly from the corner. What do you think they want? Before anyone could answer, the door opened and Hassan entered with an interpreter, a thin man who translated Hassan's Pashto into careful English. The commander has prepared a demonstration for his fighters. You represent American military power, American training, American superiority. He wishes to prove to his men that these things are myths, that Americans bleed and break like any other soldiers. Hassan watched their faces as the interpreter continued. You will be released into the mountains tomorrow at dawn with basic supplies and a head start. Then his best fighters will hunt you. When you are recaptured, you will be displayed as proof that American soldiers are not the elite warriors their propaganda claims. The interpreter paused, then added a detail that made Chin's blood run cold. Previous American soldiers have participated in this exercise. None have survived recapture. Williams lurched forward, rage overcoming exhaustion, but Hassan's guards restrained him easily. The commander smiled at the outburst, speaking again through his interpreter. Your passion confirms what I suspect. You are taught to believe you are special, that your training makes you superior. Tomorrow we will demonstrate the truth. Americans die in these mountains like anyone else, and when my fighters see this with their own eyes, their fear of you will vanish. Chun studied Hassan with new understanding. This wasn't about intelligence or ransom or tactical advantage. This was psychological warfare against his own fighters' morale, using captured Americans as props in a theater designed to break the myth of coalition superiority. She recognized the strategy because she'd studied insurgent tactics extensively during her training. What Hassan didn't know was that she'd also trained extensively in exactly the kind of survival and resistance scenario he was proposing. Hassan turned to leave, then paused and spoke directly to Chun in English without the interpreter. You surrendered to save your sergeant. This tells me you are brave, but sentimental. Sentiment is weakness, Lieutenant. Tomorrow you will learn this lesson personally. The door closed behind him, leaving the 4 Americans in darkness with the weight of his words settling over them like a burial shroud. Morrison turned to Chun with desperate eyes. Can we survive this? She considered lying, offering false hope to ease his fear. Instead, she gave him the truth in a voice steady enough to anchor them all. If we run like prey, we die. If we think like operators, we have a chance. Park leaned forward. What are you thinking? Chun allowed herself the smallest smile despite their situation. I'm thinking Hassan just made his first serious mistake. The others waited for explanation, but she shook her head. Rest now. When they release us tomorrow, I need all of you thinking clearly. Williams protested, but Gomez cut him off. She got us this far. Let her work. Chun settled against the wall, her mind already moving through tactical scenarios, terrain analysis, and the dozens of lessons learned from survival training that suddenly carried life or death weight. Hassan believed he was the hunter, that American training was propaganda, that 4 exhausted prisoners posed no real threat to his organized force. Tomorrow she would teach him the difference between well-trained and truly dangerous. Tomorrow she would show him what happened when you turn survival training into tactical deployment. Tomorrow Hassan would learn that releasing a reconnaissance specialist in a hostile terrain wasn't demonstration sport. It was the beginning of his worst operational nightmare. She closed her eyes, centering her thoughts, preparing her body for what was coming. The weapon doesn't choose when it's deployed, she remembered from her instructor's voice. It simply performs its function when needed. Hassan wanted to prove Americans bled like anyone else. Chun would prove something far more important. She would prove that proper training didn't make you special, it made you lethal. The difference would become very clear very quickly, though Hassan would recognize his error only after it was far too late to correct. In the darkness of their makeshift prison, surrounded by enemies who believed they controlled the situation, Sarah Chun became something her captors had never truly encountered. She became the weapon itself, patient and precise, waiting only for the moment of deployment. Have you ever been in a situation where someone severely underestimated your abilities? Where their assumptions about your limitations became their strategic weakness? Share your location and whether you've experienced that particular satisfaction of proving wrong those who dismissed you too quickly. Dawn arrived with Hassan's guards dragging Chun from the storage building while her 3 squad members remained bound inside. The commander waited in what had clearly been a mine supervisor's office, now converted into his command center with detailed topographical maps covering every wall. He dismissed the guards with a gesture, leaving only his interpreter present as Chun stood before the desk with her hands still zip-tied. Hassan studied her in the morning light with the calculated assessment of someone evaluating equipment rather than a prisoner. Your file arrived during the night through sources within the Afghan military. Lieutenant Sarah Chun, reconnaissance specialist, 3 combat deployments, advanced survival training, designated high-value operator. He tapped the folder on his desk. This changes my plans considerably. You're not merely another American soldier. You're exactly what I need. Chun remained silent, watching his eyes rather than his hands, reading the intelligence behind his theatrical presentation. Hassan smiled at her stillness. You wonder what I mean. Let me explain clearly so you understand the game we will play. He stood and moved to the largest map, tracing mountain routes with his finger. My fighters are veterans of many battles, but they have developed an unfortunate fear. American soldiers, they believe, are superhuman. Better trained, better equipped, impossible to defeat in individual combat. The interpreter translated smoothly as Hassan continued. This fear is poison to effective resistance. It makes my men hesitate, doubt, withdraw when they should press attacks. I have tried speeches, tried showing them burn American vehicles, tried explaining that technology does not equal superiority. Nothing works. They need to see with their own eyes that Americans bleed, that Americans panic, that Americans die like any other soldiers when stripped of their advantages. Chen understood immediately where this was leading, but she let him finish his explanation. Hassan turned from the map to face her directly. I had planned a simple exercise. Release your team into the mountains, hunt them down, display their recapture as demonstration. But you, Lieutenant Chun, you are far better than simple demonstration. You are the myth made flesh. Reconnaissance specialist. Advanced training. High-value operator. When my fighters hunt and capture you specifically, the psychological impact will be devastating to American mystique. He walked closer, his satisfaction evident in the way he moved. I will give you everything your training promises to provide. Equipment, head start, terrain advantage. My best 12 fighters will pursue you under control conditions. When they succeed, when they bring you back to this compound alive and defeated, my men will finally understand that American Special Operations soldiers are simply soldiers. Skilled perhaps, but mortal, vulnerable, beatable. Chin spoke for the first time since entering the room. And my team? Hassan waved dismissively. They remain here as insurance for your cooperation. When you are recaptured, they will be released across the border unharmed. I have no interest in standard infantry prisoners. They serve their purpose by ensuring you play this game seriously rather than simply running until you die of exposure. The interpreter hesitated before translating Hassan's next words, but the commander insisted. 3 other American soldiers have participated in similar exercises over 14 months. All died during recapture when they resisted too vigorously. I have learned from these mistakes. You will be brought back alive, Lieutenant, because your survival serves my purposes better than your death. The proof must be undeniable. Chun processed this information with the cold calculation her training had instilled. Hassan had killed 3 American soldiers in elaborate hunting games, and now she stood as his 4th target. The difference was that his previous victims had apparently been standard infantry, not specialists with her specific skill set. He saw her training as making her a better trophy. She saw it as making her a better weapon. Hassan returned to his desk and opened a map case. Here is what I offer. You will be released at dawn tomorrow from the northern gate with basic supplies. Water, basic rations, no weapons, standard field clothing. You will have 3 hours head start into terrain of your choosing. His finger traced a circle on the map. This area, roughly 80 square kilometers, contains everything you need. Caves, water sources, elevation advantages. Use your training. Make this interesting. After 3 hours, 12 of my best fighters begin pursuit. All combat veterans. From former Afghan National Army, 3 former Pakistani military, 2 Chechen, 1 former British Army, 2 local mountain fighters who know this terrain perfectly. They will have weapons, communications, coordination. Everything your training teaches you to overcome. The hunt will continue until you are captured. Hours, days, whatever time is required. Chun studied the map, memorizing terrain features and calculating approach routes, while Hassan watched her analysis with approval. You're already thinking tactically. Excellent. This is exactly the demonstration I need. My fighters will see American training in action, see it fail against superior numbers and local knowledge, and their fear will break. He paused, then added with genuine curiosity. Tell me, Lieutenant, do you believe you can evade 12 trained hunters for more than 24 hours? She met his eyes with an expression that gave nothing away. That depends on whether they're hunting prey or walking into a kill zone. Hassan laughed, the sound echoing off the stone walls. Such confidence. This is also part of the myth I must destroy. American arrogance. American certainty of superiority. When my men drag you back exhausted and defeated, that arrogance will be exposed as hollow propaganda. The door opened and Hassan's second-in-command entered. A scarred veteran named Farouk who carried himself with the economical movement of genuine combat experience. He spoke rapidly in Pashto, gesturing toward the prisoner compound. Hassan's expression shifted from satisfaction to anger as he responded harshly. The interpreter remained silent, but Chun read the body language clearly. Something had complicated Hassan's plan. Farouk argued back, his tone respectful but firm. Hassan snapped a command, and the second-in-command departed quickly. The commander turned back to Chun, his theatrical demeanor cracking slightly. Your sergeant has informed the other prisoners of my previous hunts through speaking with guards. Now your soldiers know those Americans died and believe you will die as well. They're threatening suicide rather than cooperate with watching your execution. Chun kept her expression neutral, but internally she recognized Morrison's tactic. Her sergeant was applying pressure, trying to force Hassan into either abandoning his plan or revealing information about his true intentions. Hassan circled the desk, thinking rapidly. I cannot have them dead before the demonstration. Their survival guarantees your participation. But if they truly believe you will die, their despair serves no purpose except disruption. He made his decision with visible frustration at the complication. I will modify the terms. Your team remains here as prisoners, but when you're recaptured alive and unharmed, all 4 of you will be released together across the Pakistani border. No trophy display, no extended captivity. Simple catch and release once the demonstration is complete. This satisfies honor, removes suicide motivation, and still achieves my goal of proving American soldiers can be defeated by determined fighters. Chen saw the opportunity immediately. Let me speak with my sergeant. I'll ensure his cooperation. Hassan considered, then nodded. You have 5 minutes under guard supervision. Make him understand that resistance now means death for everyone. Cooperation means eventual freedom. Choose your words carefully, Lieutenant. His smile returned, colder than before. And remember that I have invested considerable planning in this exercise. I will not tolerate disruption. Guards escorted Chun to the storage building where Morrison and the 3 specialists waited in the dim morning light. Her sergeant stood immediately, his face showing the exhaustion and stress of sleepless captivity. Chen spoke quietly before he could begin his protest. Morrison, listen carefully. Hassan's killed 3 Americans in these hunts over 14 months. He expects me to die or be broken during this one. That's his mistake. Morrison started to object, but she cut him off with a look that reminded him of their rank difference and her authority. You want me to run scared and get caught? Instead, I'm going to do what I was trained to do. Hunt when hunted. Use the terrain. Take his assets. Break his operation from inside. The 3 specialists leaned closer, hope replacing despair in their expressions as they recognized her tone. She continued in a voice barely above a whisper. When I leave tomorrow, I need you 3 to stay calm, stay healthy, and trust that I'm not running away from this fight. I'm deploying into it. Hassan thinks he's testing American training. He's actually releasing a specialist operator into hostile terrain with advanced intelligence about enemy composition and tactics. He's given me everything I need except weapons, and I'll acquire those from his own people. Morrison searched her face, then nodded slowly. You actually think you can win this? Chen allowed herself a tight smile. I know I can survive it. Surviving it in a way that destroys his demonstration and gets us all home is just a matter of proper execution. Park spoke up quietly. What do you need from us? Chen's response was immediate. Stay alive. Stay ready. When things change suddenly, and they will, be prepared to move fast. The guard's signal time was up. Chen met each soldier's eyes in turn. Morrison, Gomez, Park, Williams. You're my responsibility and my team. I don't leave people behind. I don't quit fights because they look bad, and I sure as hell don't give terrorist commanders the satisfaction of proving the propaganda. Hassan wants to break the myth of American capability. Instead, he's about to create a very real nightmare he can't control. As guards led her back to Hassan's command center, Chun felt her training sliding into place like weapons being loaded and made ready. The commander thought he'd designed a demonstration with controlled variables and predictable outcomes. What he'd actually created was a tactical scenario where a specialist operator with nothing to lose and everything to prove would have 3 hours to prepare defensive positions before enemy contact. Hassan waited with maps and equipment laid out, clearly pleased that his prisoner had returned without incident. He gestured to the supplies. Standard issue. Nothing special. Water, rations, basic first aid, emergency blanket. You will dress in these clothes, plain mountain clothing without military identification. At dawn you walk out the north gate and choose your path. 3 hours later, my hunters follow. Simple, clean, decisive. Chen examined the supplies with the practiced eye of someone who understood that simple gear in trained hands became tactical advantage. She looked up at Hassan with an expression of calculated respect. You planned this carefully. The commander preened slightly. Of course, I'm not some amateur fighter. I studied military tactics at university in London before circumstances brought me back to Afghanistan. I understand how to structure operations for maximum psychological impact. His hubris was showing, and Chun filed that information away with everything else she'd learned. Hassan was educated, intelligent, experienced, but fundamentally he'd never faced someone with her specific training profile. He'd fought against conventional forces, maybe even against special operations units in group combat. But he'd never released a reconnaissance specialist into terrain with explicit orders to evade and survive, while that specialist was simultaneously analyzing his fighter's capabilities and planning tactical responses. Tomorrow would teach him the difference between reading about unconventional warfare and experiencing it personally. Tomorrow he would learn what happened when you gave a weapon time to prepare the battlefield. Tomorrow Hassan's carefully planned demonstration would transform into his most significant operational failure. Chun accepted the supplies with appropriate meekness, playing her role as defeated prisoner one final time before the game shifted entirely. Hassan dismissed her back to the holding building, confident in his preparations and certain of his eventual success. As guards locked the door behind her, Chun began the mental preparation that would transform her from prisoner to predator. The weapon was loaded. The target had identified itself. All that remained was the trigger pull of Dawn's release. Hassan believed he was the hunter. Tomorrow would prove him catastrophically wrong about which role he actually occupied in this scenario. Dawn broke cold over the compound as guards escorted Chun to the northern gate, where Hassan waited with his hunting party assembled behind him. 12 fighters stood in loose formation, their confidence evident in relaxed postures and casual weapon handling. They wore mixed uniforms and carried an assortment of rifles, all well-maintained and ready. Hassan gestured to the supplies at Chen's feet. One canteen, basic rations wrapped in cloth, thin emergency blanket, nothing more. The commander addressed his fighters in Pashto, his voice carrying across the courtyard while the interpreter translated quietly for Chen's benefit. This American lieutenant is reconnaissance specialist, trained in survival and evasion. She represents their elite capability. In 3 hours, you will begin pursuit. Bring her back alive and unharmed. Prove that training and equipment mean nothing against determination and local knowledge. His fighters nodded, some smiling at what they clearly viewed as simple work. Hassan turned to Chun with theatrical formality. You have 1 hour head start, Lieutenant. I reduced your advantage to make this demonstration conclude more quickly. Use your training. Choose your terrain carefully. Make my hunters work for their victory. He paused, then added with genuine curiosity. Any final words before you begin? Chin shouldered the meager supplies and met his eyes with an expression that revealed nothing. See you soon, Commander. She walked through the gate as morning light spread across the mountains, moving at a steady pace that suggested exhaustion rather than tactical deployment. Hassan watched her disappear around the first ridge, then turned to his assembled hunters with satisfaction. 1 hour, then bring back my demonstration. The fighters dispersed to prepare weapons and equipment while Hassan returned to his command center to monitor the operation. Chun maintained her exhausted pace for exactly 12 minutes, moving along the obvious trail until the compound was no longer visible. Then she shifted immediately into reconnaissance mode, her fatigue dropping away as training took control of her movements. She left the trail and climbed rapidly through rocky terrain, using natural cover to mask her route while scanning the landscape for tactical features she'd memorized from Hassan's maps. The mountains offered exactly what she needed: narrow defile that would channel pursuit into predictable paths, rocky outcrops providing elevation and sightlines, cave systems visible on south-facing slopes where erosion had created natural defensive positions, water sources in 3 locations that any extended operation would require. Chun cataloged everything while moving fast through terrain her training had prepared her to navigate. 30 minutes from the compound, she reached her first objective, a rocky outcrop overlooking multiple approach routes. She set down her supplies and began immediate tactical preparation, using rocks to create site markers at 300, 500, and 700-meter ranges. The positions would help her judge distance instantly once she acquired a weapon. When she acquired a weapon, she corrected mentally, because failure was not remotely acceptable. Chun consumed half her water and one ration pack, fueling her body for what was coming. She checked the emergency blanket, noting its reflective interior could serve multiple purposes beyond warmth. The cloth wrapping from the rations became cordage when torn into strips and twisted. Everything was potential equipment in trained hands. Her instructors had drilled that principle until it became instinct. The weapon is not the tool. It is the operator who transforms tools into weapons. 55 minutes after her release, Chen heard the first sounds of pursuit beginning. Distant voices carrying across the valley, the distinctive crack of weapons being charged, the organized movement of coordinated hunters beginning their work. She smiled coldly while moving to an observation position that provided clear sight lines back toward the compound area. Hassan's fighters were starting their approach exactly as predicted, following the obvious trail she deliberately used during her initial movement. Through gaps in the terrain, she caught glimpses of the hunting party spreading into formation. They moved with reasonable tactical discipline, weapons ready and spacing adequate, but their body language revealed overconfidence. No extreme caution, no expectation of real threat. Just 12 experienced fighters pursuing one exhausted, unarmed woman through terrain they knew well. Chun watched them advance, memorizing individual movement patterns and identifying which fighters took point, which provided flank security, which stayed in comfortable middle positions. She had what she needed: intel on their approach patterns, confirmation of their overconfidence, and identification of their tactical weaknesses. Chun moved from her observation point and climbed higher into the mountains, leaving minimal trail sign while selecting terrain that would tire pursuers and funnel them into disadvantageous positions. Her training had covered every aspect of this scenario: evade when advantageous, engage when opportunity presents itself, and never forget that survival is achieved through controlling the operational tempo. 2 hours into the hunt, Hassan's fighters reached the rocky outcrop where Chun had prepared her range markers. She watched from a concealed position 400 meters distant as they examined the area, clearly puzzled by the careful arrangement of stones. The lead tracker, a weathered fighter she'd mentally designated as Malik based on how others deferred to his judgment, knelt to study the markers while speaking into his radio. Chin used their distraction to continue her movement, circling through broken terrain that would mask her passage. She'd identified her first target, a younger fighter who consistently drifted from the main group during movement, overconfident in his individual security and careless about maintaining visual contact with his teammates. The fighter carried a rifle, spare magazines, a radio clipped to his belt, and most importantly, a combat knife in a sheath at his hip. She tracked him patiently as the hunting party continued their pursuit, waiting for the moment when terrain and timing would provide optimal opportunity. 3 hours after the hunt began, that moment arrived. The careless fighter had separated to investigate a cave entrance, moving inside without waiting for backup, while his teammates continued along the main trail above. Chin gave him 30 seconds to penetrate deep enough that sound wouldn't carry, then moved. The fighter never saw her coming. She'd approached from the cave's secondary entrance, a narrow fissure she'd identified during her earlier reconnaissance. Her attack was precise and economical, using techniques drilled through thousands of repetitions until they required no thought. The fighter went down hard, his weapon clattering against stone as Chin's strike disabled him without causing lasting injury. She wasn't here to kill unnecessarily. She was here to acquire assets and demonstrate capability. Chin secured his rifle, checked the magazine and chamber with practiced efficiency, then stripped his spare ammunition, radio, knife, and water. The fighter groaned as consciousness returned, finding himself disarmed and facing the woman he'd been hunting. She spoke quietly in English, knowing he likely understood at least basic commands. Tell Hassan that hunting and being hunted are very different skills. Tell him the demonstration has changed direction. She used his own zip ties to secure him in a position where he'd eventually work free, but not for several hours, then moved to the cave entrance and examined her new tactical situation. Armed now with a rifle and ammunition, intelligence access through the capture radio, and a blade for close work if required. More importantly, Hassan's hunters had just learned their prey had eliminated one of their number and acquired weapons. The psychological impact would be immediate. Chun climbed to an elevated position overlooking the cave entrance and settled into a hide with clear sight lines across 3 approach routes. She activated the captured radio and listened to the increasingly urgent transmissions as Malik discovered his missing fighter. The tracker's voice carried tension now, no longer casual confidence, but alert wariness. The hunting party was regrouping, their formation tightening as they recognized the situation had transformed. She watched through a newly acquired rifle scope as Malik directed 3 fighters to investigate the cave system. Their approach was cautious now, weapons raised and spacing professional. Chun tracked the lead fighter through her optics, her finger resting outside the trigger guard while she calculated angles and wind. She could take the shot, drop him easily at this range, but killing wasn't her objective. Creating psychological impact was. The 3 fighters found their bound teammate and immediately radioed the discovery. Chun listened to Malik's reaction, heard the shift in his tone as he processed what had happened. The American had attacked, disarmed, and released their fighter alive. She'd taken weapons and equipment, but hadn't killed when she had opportunity. The message was clear. This wasn't desperate survival. It was controlled tactical engagement. Malik's next transmission carried new authority as he ordered his remaining 11 fighters into defensive formation. The hunt was pausing while they reassessed their target. Chun used the delay to relocate, moving through terrain she'd already mapped mentally, establishing her next position before they completed their reorganization. Hassan's fighters were learning the hard way that reconnaissance specialists didn't run in panic. They controlled terrain, gathered intelligence, and struck when advantageous. 4 hours into the operation, Chun occupied a ridge position with 360-degree visibility and multiple fallback routes prepared. She'd cached her emergency blanket and remaining rations in a secure location, traveling light now with just weapon, ammunition, radio, water, and knife. Every piece of gear served immediate tactical purpose. Her body moved with the efficient economy of someone completely in their element, fatigue pushed aside by training and purpose. Through the radio, she heard Hassan's voice for the first time since the hunt began, speaking to Malik in terse Pashto. The translator wasn't present, but Chun recognized the commander's tone, frustrated confusion. His carefully planned demonstration was deviating from script. 1 fighter eliminated, weapons captured, and his hunting party now moving cautiously instead of aggressively. This was supposed to be simple pursuit of exhausted prey. Instead, it was becoming tactical engagement against an opponent who understood the terrain and the operational tempo better than his own experienced fighters. Chun allowed herself a brief smile before moving to her next position. Hassan had wanted to prove American training was myth and propaganda. She was proving something far more important, that proper preparation and tactical discipline transformed any scenario into an opportunity for operational success. The hunters were discovering this lesson personally, 1 eliminated fighter and 1 captured weapons cache at a time. Malik regrouped his remaining 11 fighters in defensive positions as afternoon sun began casting long shadows across the mountains. Chun watched from concealment, noting how their confident hunters' advance had become cautious security patrol. They'd learned respect in the span of 4 hours. Now, they would learn fear. She checked her rifle, confirmed her ammunition count, and prepared to demonstrate the next lesson in her tactical curriculum. Hassan's demonstration was indeed teaching his fighters about American capabilities, just not the lesson he'd intended. Chun had become exactly what her training had prepared her to be. Not a frightened prisoner running in desperation, but a weapon deployed with precision into hostile terrain. The hunters were beginning to understand this distinction. Soon Hassan would understand it as well. though by then his carefully constructed demonstration would have collapsed completely. The weapon had been released and armed. Now came the systematic dismantling of everything Hassan had built, one tactical engagement at a time. Chen settled into her hide and waited for the next opportunity to present itself. In these mountains, against these overconfident hunters, she knew opportunity would come soon. Malik's tactical reorganization took 30 minutes, time Chen used to identify the hunting party's new vulnerabilities. Through her captured radio, she monitored their communications, learning which fighters were becoming nervous and which maintained confidence despite their teammates' elimination. The Chechen fighters remained aggressive, pushing Malik to resume the hunt. The former Afghan military members urged caution. The tension in their transmissions told Chen everything she needed about their deteriorating unit cohesion. She watched through her rifle scope as the hunting party split into two elements. Malik led 6 fighters along the primary ridge route, while his second group of 5 moved through the valley below, attempting to bracket her last known position. The tactic was sound in theory, but revealed critical assumptions. They believed she was still evading rather than preparing ambush positions, and they assumed she'd follow predictable escape routes instead of doubling back through terrain they'd already cleared. Chen had circled behind their advance, occupying a position they'd passed an hour earlier. The rocky outcrop provided excellent concealment and clear sight lines across the approach route any reinforcement would use to support the forward elements. She settled into her hide, using the captured fighter's radio to monitor both groups while calculating engagement angles and fallback routes. Her training had emphasized this principle repeatedly: never engage without knowing your exit, and never exit without knowing your next position. The valley element moved into view first, 5 fighters advancing in staggered formation with reasonable spacing and weapon discipline. Chen tracked them through her scope, identifying the team leader by his frequent radio checks and the way others oriented on his position. She could drop him easily from 400 meters, but that single shot would reveal her position and force immediate displacement. Instead, she waited, watching for the opportunity her patience would eventually provide. That opportunity came when the valley element reached a narrow defile between 2 rock formations. The terrain naturally compressed their spacing, forcing them into a column formation that violated every principle of tactical movement through restricted terrain. Chen noted the error with professional detachment, while confirming her next 3 positions were still clear for rapid movement after engagement. The team leader entered the defile first, followed by his 4 fighters in close succession. Chen aimed not at personnel, but at equipment, her crosshairs settling on the radio attached to the team leader's belt. The shot broke clean, her rifle's report echoing across the valley as the radio exploded into fragments. The team leader dove for cover while his fighters scattered, their formation collapsing as they searched for the shooter's position. Chen was already moving, her shot placement having achieved exactly what she intended: communications disruption and psychological impact without casualties. Malik's voice erupted over the radio, demanding status from the valley element. Silence answered him as the destroyed radio left 5 fighters isolated and unable to coordinate with the main force. Chen listened to Malik's increasingly urgent calls while relocating to her secondary position, a cluster of boulders 300 meters from her original hide. The hunting party was fracturing, their coordination breaking down as she systematically attacked their ability to operate as a unified force. The valley element emerged from the defile in full defensive posture, weapons oriented on the ridgeline where Chen's muzzle flash had originated. They moved to cover and establish security while their team leader attempted hand signals to communicate with Malik's element on the ridge above. Chen observed their positions, noting how fear had replaced their earlier confidence. They'd gone from hunters to hunted in the span of 6 hours, and their body language showed they understood this reversal completely. Malik made his decision and led his 6 fighters down from the ridge to consolidate with the isolated valley element. Chen tracked their descent through her scope, watching as tactical discipline deteriorated under pressure. 2 fighters bunched together despite their leader's obvious attempts to maintain spacing. Another kept his weapon at low ready instead of proper alert carry. The Chechen fighters maintained better form, but even they showed signs of stress in their aggressive scanning patterns and frequent position checks. She let them reunite with the Valley element, listening as the team leader explained the precision shot that had destroyed his radio without touching him personally. Malik's response carried grudging respect mixed with frustration. The American was demonstrating capability rather than desperately fighting for survival. This was exhibition, not desperation. His fighters were being used as training aids in a tactical demonstration that reversed Hassan's intended purpose completely. Chun relocated again, establishing her third position in a cave system she'd identified during her initial reconnaissance. The caves provided multiple entrances, natural concealment, and sightlines that covered the most likely approach routes. She cached her emergency blanket and remaining rations in a secondary chamber, traveling with just her rifle, ammunition, knife, and water as she prepared for extended tactical operations. Every movement served specific purpose. Every position supported the next phase of her systematic dismantling of Hassan's operation. Malik regrouped his 11 remaining fighters and made the tactical decision Chun had anticipated. Rather than continue aggressive pursuit, he established a defensive perimeter and sent one fighter back to the compound for additional support and updated orders from Hassan. The hunting party was transitioning to siege mentality, their confident manhunt transformed into cautious security patrol. Chun watched the messenger depart, mentally calculating the round-trip time and planning her next engagement for maximum psychological impact during his absence. The cave system's geography offered an opportunity too perfect to ignore. A natural choke point existed where any approach from the valley required passing through a narrow gap between two rock formations. Chun prepared an improvised obstacle using loose stones positioned to collapse when disturbed, creating noise and disruption without requiring her direct engagement. She worked quickly and efficiently, her survival training translating into practical battlefield engineering. With her traps set, Chun moved to an overwatch position and keyed the captured radio. She spoke clearly in English, knowing Malik's education and military background meant he would understand. Your fighters are tired and scared. Your radios are vulnerable. Your positions are exposed. Tell Hassan his demonstration is teaching exactly the lessons he didn't want taught. She released the transmit key and listened to the shocked silence that followed. Malik responded after a long pause, his English heavily accented but clear. You cannot win, American. We have 11 fighters. You have one rifle. Eventually you sleep. Eventually you make mistake. Eventually we bring you back. His words carried conviction, but Chun heard the uncertainty underneath. She keyed the radio again. I already won, Malik. Every hour your hunters learn fear is an hour Hassan's propaganda fails. You're not hunting me. You're teaching your own people to respect what they should have feared from the beginning. The psychological warfare was deliberate and calculated. Hassan had wanted to break myths about American capability. Chun was reinforcing those myths while simultaneously proving they weren't myths at all. She was teaching through demonstration, showing Hassan's fighters that proper training created tangible tactical advantage. Every engagement, every successful evasion, every precision shot reinforced the lesson until it became undeniable. Malik didn't respond to her transmission, but Chun observed increased activity in his defensive perimeter through her scope. Fighters checking equipment, adjusting positions, scanning terrain with new urgency. Her words had achieved their purpose, creating doubt and eroding confidence. The Chechen fighters appeared agitated, gesturing emphatically at Malik, who maintained his defensive posture despite their obvious desire for aggressive action. Chun settled into her observation position as afternoon faded toward evening. She consumed water and a ration pack, fueling her body while maintaining constant surveillance of Hassan's hunting party. They were trapped now in a tactical dilemma of their own creation. Remaining defensive meant acknowledging they'd lost control of the operation, but pressing offensive meant exposing themselves to an opponent who'd already demonstrated superior capability in this terrain. The messenger returned from the compound as sunset painted the mountains in orange and red light. Chen watched through her scope as he delivered Hassan's orders to Malik. Even at distance, she could read the body language. Hassan was demanding renewed aggressive pursuit, refusing to acknowledge his demonstration had completely inverted. Malik's posture showed reluctant compliance, his tactical judgment overridden by his commander's pride. The hunting party prepared for night operations, breaking out equipment and consolidating ammunition. Chun noted their preparations with professional assessment. They would push forward in darkness, using numbers and coordination to overwhelm her defensive advantages. The tactic was sound if they'd been facing a standard evader. Against a reconnaissance specialist who'd spent 6 hours preparing the battlefield, it was walking into a carefully constructed trap. She moved through the cave system to her primary defensive position, a chamber with 3 exits and clear sight lines to the approaches. Her rifle was loaded and ready, spare magazines positioned for quick access, knife secured where she could reach it instantly. Everything was prepared for the engagement she knew was coming. Hassan's fighters were about to learn the most important lesson of the day. Initiative belongs to whoever controls the terrain, and Shin had owned this terrain since the moment of her release. Darkness fell completely over the mountains as Malik's element began their advance. Shin listened to their radio traffic, tracking their movement through audio cues and the occasional glimpse of lights they couldn't completely conceal. They were moving tactically but predictably, following the routes she'd anticipated during her planning. The trap in the choke point waited silently for the moment when overconfidence and darkness combined to create tactical error. The weapon was loaded and the battlefield was prepared. Hassan's demonstration was about to receive its most definitive lesson yet. Chun checked her equipment one final time and waited with the infinite patience her training had instilled. In darkness, in hostile terrain, against superior numbers, she was exactly where every hour of her preparation had led. The hunters were coming. She was ready. Hassan sat in his command center staring at maps that no longer represented control, but rather documented his losing grip on an operation that should have concluded hours ago. The messenger's report lay on his desk. One fighter disarmed and released, communications equipment destroyed, hunting party reduced to defensive posture, and worst of all, the American woman speaking directly to his fighters over captured radio with messages designed to erode their morale. He'd created this scenario to destroy myths about American capability. Instead, he was reinforcing those myths with each passing hour. His second-in-command, Farouk, entered without knocking, his expression carrying the weight of bad news. "Commander, we must discuss the situation." Hassan waved him to silence, but Farouk persisted. "Your hunters have been in the field for 9 hours. They have eliminated 0 targets, lost equipment and capability, and are now operating in defensive mode while one American woman controls the tactical tempo. This is not demonstration. This is disaster." Hassan's fury erupted in rapid Pashto, his words echoing off stone walls as he detailed everything he'd invested in this operation. The planning, the preparation, the careful selection of terrain and fighters. How could 12 experienced combatants fail to capture one exhausted woman armed with basic supplies? Farouk waited for the storm to pass before responding quietly. Because she is not an exhausted woman with basic supplies. She is exactly what her file claims. Reconnaissance specialist with advanced training. You released a weapon into terrain it was designed to dominate. The words struck Hassan like physical blows because they carried undeniable truth. He'd read Chen's file and dismissed the significance of her training designations, believing practical mountain fighting would overcome theoretical specialist education. Now his carefully planned psychological operation was teaching his fighters exactly the opposite lesson he'd intended. They weren't learning that Americans were vulnerable. They were learning that American specialists were every bit as dangerous as reputation suggested. Farouk pressed his tactical advantage. "We should recall the hunters, accept this operation has failed, and focus on preventing further damage to unit morale." Hassan shook his head violently. Recall means admitting defeat, admitting we cannot capture one American woman even with overwhelming advantages. The damage to my authority and our fighters' confidence would be catastrophic. We continue until she is captured or our entire force is deployed if necessary. Hassan reached for his radio and contacted Malik directly, his voice carrying command authority that permitted no dissent. You will continue pursuit through the night. Use your numerical advantage. She cannot watch all directions simultaneously. She must sleep eventually. Press her until exhaustion creates the mistake we need. Malik's acknowledgement came through with barely concealed reluctance, but Hassan terminated the transmission before his lead hunter could voice objections. In the mountains, Malik gathered his 11 fighters and explained Hassan's orders with visible frustration. The Chechen fighters nodded eagerly, their aggressive nature welcoming the chance for direct action. The former military members exchanged glances that spoke volumes about their assessment of this decision. Malik organized them into 2 assault elements, with himself leading the primary thrust while his most experienced fighter commanded the secondary team to provide flank security. Chun observed their preparation through her scope, noting the increased activity and organization that indicated renewed offensive operations. She'd anticipated this response, knowing Hassan's pride would prevent tactical withdrawal. The hunting party was about to push forward into terrain she'd spent hours preparing, darkness reducing their advantages while her familiarity with prepared positions provided significant edge. This engagement would determine whether Hassan's operation could be salvaged or would collapse completely. The primary element moved first, 6 fighters advancing in tactical formation through the narrow valley approach. Chun tracked their movement from her cave position, letting them penetrate deep into the engagement area before taking any action. Her improvised rock trap waited silently in the choke point ahead, positioned to create maximum confusion when triggered. The secondary element provided overwatch from the ridge above, their positions exposed to anyone who knew where to look. Malik's point man reached the choke point and triggered Chen's trap. Rocks cascaded down with thunderous noise, striking the narrow passage and forcing the entire element to scatter for cover. Chen didn't fire during the chaos, instead observing how they reacted to unexpected contact. Their training showed in rapid defensive responses, but panic showed too in the way 2 fighters fired blindly at shadows while Malik shouted commands trying to restore order. The secondary element on the ridge reacted to the noise by breaking cover and moving forward to support, exactly as Chun had calculated they would. She tracked the lead fighter through her scope and fired once, the round striking the radio equipment on his tactical vest. The fighter went down from impact force alone, uninjured but shocked and deafened by the precision hit. His teammates dove for cover while Chun displaced immediately, moving through her prepared fallback route before they could organize return fire. Malik's voice carried across the valley as he attempted to rally his scattered elements. The American was Ghost, striking from unexpected positions and disappearing before effective response. His fighters reg. Hassan sat in his command center staring at maps that no longer represented control, but rather documented his losing grip on an operation that should have concluded hours ago. The messenger's report lay on his desk. 1 fighter disarmed and released, communications equipment destroyed, hunting party reduced to defensive posture, and worst of all, the American woman speaking directly to his fighters over captured radio with messages designed to erode their morale. He'd created this scenario to destroy myths about American capability. Instead, he was reinforcing those myths with each passing hour. His second-in-command, Farouk, entered without knocking, his expression carrying the weight of bad news. "Commander, we must discuss the situation." Hassan waved him to silence, but Farouk persisted. "Your hunters have been in the field for 9 hours. They have eliminated 0 targets, lost equipment and capability, and are now operating in defensive mode while 1 American woman controls the tactical tempo. This is not demonstration. This is disaster." Hassan's fury erupted in rapid Pashto, his words echoing off stone walls as he detailed everything he'd invested in this operation. The planning, the preparation, the careful selection of terrain and fighters. How could 12 experienced combatants fail to capture 1 exhausted woman armed with basic supplies. Farouk waited for the storm to pass before responding quietly. Because she is not an exhausted woman with basic supplies. She is exactly what her file claims. Reconnaissance specialist with advanced training. You released a weapon into terrain it was designed to dominate. The words struck Hassan like physical blows because they carried undeniable truth. He'd read Chen's file and dismissed the significance of her training designations, believing practical mountain fighting would overcome theoretical specialist education. Now his carefully planned psychological operation was teaching his fighters exactly the opposite lesson he'd intended. They weren't learning that Americans were vulnerable. They were learning that American specialists were every bit as dangerous as reputation suggested. Farouk pressed his tactical advantage. We should recall the hunters, accept this operation has failed, and focus on preventing further damage to unit morale. Hassan shook his head violently. Recall means admitting defeat, admitting we cannot capture one American woman, even with overwhelming advantages. The damage to my authority and our fighters' confidence would be catastrophic. We continue until she is captured or our entire force is deployed if necessary. Hassan reached for his radio and contacted Malik directly, his voice carrying command authority that permitted no dissent. You will continue pursuit through the night. Use your numerical advantage. She cannot watch all directions simultaneously. She must sleep eventually. Press her until exhaustion creates the mistake we need. Malik's acknowledgement came through with barely concealed reluctance, but Hassan terminated the transmission before his lead hunter could voice objections. In the mountains, Malik gathered his 11 fighters and explained Hassan's orders with visible frustration. The Chechen fighters nodded eagerly, their aggressive nature welcoming the chance for direct action. The former military members exchanged glances that spoke volumes about their assessment of this decision. Malik organized them into 2 assault elements, with himself leading the primary thrust while his most experienced fighter commanded the secondary team to provide flank security. Chun observed their preparation through her scope, noting the increased activity and organization that indicated renewed offensive operations. She'd anticipated this response, knowing Hassan's pride would prevent tactical withdrawal. The hunting party was about to push forward into terrain she'd spent hours preparing, darkness reducing their advantages while her familiarity with prepared positions provided significant edge. This engagement would determine whether Hassan's operation could be salvaged or would collapse completely. The primary element moved first, 6 fighters advancing in tactical formation through the narrow valley approach. Chun tracked their movement from her cave position, letting them penetrate deep into the engagement area before taking any action. Her improvised rock trap waited silently in the choke point ahead, positioned to create maximum confusion when triggered. The secondary element provided overwatch from the ridge above, their positions exposed to anyone who knew where to look. Malik's point man reached the choke point and triggered Chen's trap. Rocks cascaded down with thunderous noise, striking the narrow passage and forcing the entire element to scatter for cover. Chen didn't fire during the chaos, instead observing how they reacted to unexpected contact. Their training showed in rapid defensive responses, but panic showed too in the way 2 fighters fired blindly at shadows while Malik shouted commands trying to restore order. The secondary element on the ridge reacted to the noise by breaking cover and moving forward to support, exactly as Chun had calculated they would. She tracked the lead fighter through her scope and fired once, the round striking the radio equipment on his tactical vest. The fighter went down from impact force alone, uninjured but shocked and deafened by the precision hit. His teammates dove for cover while Chun displaced immediately, moving through her prepared fallback route before they could organize return fire. Malik's voice carried across the valley as he attempted to rally his scattered elements. The American was Ghost, striking from unexpected positions and disappearing before effective response. His fighters regrouped slowly, their movements hesitant now as darkness and tactical uncertainty combined to create paralyzing caution. Back at the compound, Hassan monitored the chaos through radio transmissions. Each broken communication each report of contact without result. Each admission of lost equipment eroded his confidence that this operation could be salvaged. Farouk stood beside him in silence, his presence a wordless reminder of warnings Hassan had ignored. The commander's hands clenched as he heard Malik request permission to withdraw and consolidate, a request Hassan denied with fury that barely masked growing desperation. Chen moved through the night with efficiency born from countless training iterations in similar terrain. She'd relocated to her fourth prepared position, this one offering observation of both the valley approach and ridge routes while providing multiple escape paths. Her ammunition count remained adequate for sustained operations, her water supply sufficient for another day, her physical condition strong despite hours of continuous tactical movement. Everything Hassan had assumed would work against her, exhaustion, isolation, resource depletion, had failed to materialize because her training had prepared her for exactly these conditions. The hunting party made 3 more attempts to locate and engage her over the next 2 hours. Each attempt followed predictable patterns: movement to contact, reaction to her prepared obstacles, or precision fire, withdrawal to regroup. Chen didn't need to eliminate fighters to win this engagement. She only needed to demonstrate continuous tactical superiority until Hassan's operation collapsed under the weight of its own failure. Every hour the hunters remained in the field without success was another hour of proof that his demonstration had inverted completely. Malik finally made the decision his tactical judgment had demanded hours earlier. He gathered his fighters and began organized withdrawal toward the compound, maintaining security but no longer attempting aggressive pursuit. Hassan's voice erupted over the radio, demanding explanation, threatening consequences, ordering renewed attack. Malik's response was professionally respectful but immovable. "Commander, we have 3 fighters injured from falls during night operations, 2 more with equipment failures, and 0 tactical advantage against an opponent who owns this terrain. Continuing serves no purpose except additional casualties." The transmission ended and Hassan sat in stunned silence as his demonstration dissolved. Farouk spoke quietly into the void. "Your fighters learned lessons today, Commander. Just not the lessons you intended. They learned that American specialist training creates genuine tactical advantage. They learned that proper preparation defeats superior numbers. Most importantly, they learned that underestimating American capability based on propaganda rather than objective assessment leads to operational failure." Hassan's rage had burned out, leaving only cold recognition of his mistake. He'd captured a reconnaissance specialist, read her file, and still failed to understand what those designations meant in practical terms. The woman wasn't lucky or exceptional. She was simply properly trained for exactly the scenario he'd created. His demonstration had proven American training was effective, American tactics were sound, and American specialists were every bit as dangerous as reputation suggested. The psychological impact on his fighters would be exactly opposite his intention. Chun observed the hunting party's withdrawal from her elevated position, tracking their movement until they disappeared from her sight lines. She maintained her defensive posture for another hour, confirming they weren't attempting deception, before finally allowing herself to relax slightly. The immediate tactical situation had resolved in her favor, but the strategic picture remained unchanged. Her squad was still held prisoner in Hassan's compound, and her own situation remained precarious despite tonight's success. She moved to a secure position and cached her rifle, keeping only the knife and remaining water as she prepared for what came next. The hunting party had withdrawn, but Hassan still held her team. Rescuing them would require different tactics than the defensive operations she'd conducted in the mountains. She would need to approach the compound directly, penetrate its security, extract her squad, and escape before Hassan could organize effective response. The tactical problem was complex, but not impossible for someone with her training and the intelligence she'd gathered. Dawn approached as Chun began her movement toward the compound, using terrain and timing to remain undetected. Hassan's fighters would be exhausted from their failed night operations, their security posture degraded by fatigue and demoralization. The window for exploitation was narrow but achievable. She demonstrated her capability in the mountains. Now she would demonstrate it where Hassan believed himself secure. The weapon had proven itself in defensive operations. Now came the test of offensive action against prepared positions. Chun moved through the pre-dawn darkness with purpose and precision, every step bringing her closer to the moment when Hassan would learn his final lesson. That underestimating American capability didn't just cost tactical advantage, it cost everything. Chun reached the compound perimeter 2 hours before dawn, moving through terrain she'd memorized during her initial captivity. The security was predictable. Guards stationed at obvious points, patrol routes that followed established patterns, and most critically, fighters exhausted from failed operations who believed their greatest threat was still in the distant mountains. She observed from concealment as 2 guards walked their circuit, their weapons at low ready and their attention focused outward rather than on potential infiltration from unexpected angles. The compound's generator provided both illumination and noise that masked her approach. Chen had noted its position during her brief imprisonment and recognized it as both tactical asset and vulnerability. She moved through shadows to reach the fuel storage area, a simple shed containing jerry cans positioned too close to the generator itself. Her combat knife worked efficiently on the fuel line, creating a slow leak that would take 30 minutes to reach critical accumulation. The timing was deliberate. Enough delay for her to position for extraction, but fast enough to create the chaos she needed. Morrison, Gomez, Park, and Williams remained in the storage building where Hassan had held them since the hunt began. Chen approached from the blind side, using stacked equipment and poor lighting to avoid the single guard posted near the door. The guard was smoking and checking his phone, his attention anywhere except on actual security. She evaluated him for 10 seconds before making her decision. Non-lethal elimination and quick restraint rather than creating a body that would trigger immediate alarm. The guard went down silently, Chen's training translating into precise application of force that rendered him unconscious without lasting injury. She secured him with his own equipment and took his keys, moving to the storage building door and working the lock with practiced efficiency. The door opened, and 4 American soldiers looked up in shock as their lieutenant appeared like a ghost from the darkness they'd been staring into for hours. Morrison started to speak, but Chen raised her hand for silence, her gesture communicating urgency more effectively than words. She moved to each soldier in turn, cutting their restraints and conducting quick medical assessments. All 4 were ambulatory despite fatigue and minor injuries. She handed Morrison the guard's rifle and distributed the spare magazines among her squad. Her whispered brief was economical and clear. Fuel leak will cause generator explosion in approximately 20 minutes. We move to the north perimeter during chaos. Rally point is the rock formation 3 kilometers out, where we establish security and reassess. Park checked the guard's radio and confirmed multiple frequencies in use. Chen nodded approval and indicated he should monitor but maintain radio silence. The squad moved into position near the storage building's rear exit, waiting for the moment when Hassan's compound would transform from secure facility into crisis requiring all available attention. Chen used the time to inspect her team's condition more thoroughly, noting Williams had developed a limp and Gomez showed signs of dehydration, but both remained combat effective for the immediate extraction. The generator's fuel leak reached critical point exactly on schedule. Fire erupted with impressive force, flames climbing into the pre-dawn sky as the generator itself exploded in a shower of sparks and burning fuel. Hassan's compound descended into chaos as fighters scrambled from sleeping areas, some grabbing weapons while others rushed toward the fire with extinguishers and blankets. The guard posts abandoned their positions to assist, creating exactly the security gap Chun had calculated. She led her squad through the north perimeter breach, moving fast but controlled through terrain that offered concealment from the frantic activity behind them. No one pursued because no one had discovered the escape yet. Hassan's fighters were focused entirely on containing the fire before it spread to ammunition storage or fuel reserves. By the time someone thought to check on the American prisoners, Chun and her squad would be kilometers away with significant head start and 4 rifles instead of the 0 weapons Hassan had intended. The rally point rock formation provided cover and observation as the squad established defensive positions. Chun posted Williams and Gomez as security while she conducted detailed debrief with Morrison and Park. The sergeant described Hassan's behavior during her absence, increasingly agitated, ordering execution of prisoners, then canceling the order, arguing with Farouk about tactical decisions. Morrison's assessment was clinical and accurate. Hassan's authority was fracturing under the weight of operational failure and wounded pride. Park added critical intelligence from monitoring guard conversations. Multiple guards had discussed the hunting party's return, specifically mentioning that no one had captured the American woman and several fighters were injured. The story had spread through Hassan's force like fire, each retelling emphasizing the specialist lieutenant who'd eliminated fighters and destroyed equipment while evading capture in terrain the locals had known since childhood. Hassan's demonstration had created exactly the mythology he'd intended to destroy. Chun absorbed the intelligence and made her tactical assessment. Hassan now faced complete operational collapse. His hunting demonstration had failed spectacularly. His American prisoners had escaped during fire chaos, and his authority over his fighters was degrading rapidly. The man had 2 choices: accept defeat and abandon the area before coalition forces responded to the obvious crisis, or double down with increasingly desperate measures. Chun knew Hassan well enough after their interactions to predict he would choose desperation over acceptance. Morrison voiced the question they all needed answered. "What now, Lieutenant? Do we move to extract point and call for pickup, or do we have other objectives?" Chun studied the lightening sky and made her decision. "Hassan knows our most likely extraction route. He'll position fighters to intercept or at least observe. We need to create enough confusion that his force loses ability to conduct organized operations. Then we extract while he's dealing with internal collapse." She outlined her plan with the tactical clarity that had kept them alive through 30 hours of crisis. The burning generator would be attributed to maintenance failure or accident by most of Hassan's fighters, but Hassan himself would recognize it as deliberate sabotage. He would realize Chun had penetrated his compound, extracted her team, and destroyed critical infrastructure without firing a shot. The psychological impact on his already fragile authority would be devastating, especially when combined with his hunting party's failure. Gomez asked the obvious question: how do we amplify that psychological impact from out here? Chun smiled in the growing dawn light. "We don't need to amplify it. Hassan will do that himself by overreacting. When he discovers we're gone, he'll order massive manhunt with every available fighter. That dispersal of his force will create the chaos we need. We simply position ourselves to observe his response, identify the gaps his overreaction creates, and move through those gaps to our extraction point." The squad settled into their defensive position as sunrise painted the mountains in orange and gold. 3 kilometers away, Hassan's compound erupted in new chaos as someone finally discovered the American prisoners were gone. Through the captured radio, they heard urgent transmissions as Hassan was informed of the escape. His response was immediate and exactly as Chun had predicted. Every available fighter was ordered to mobilize for pursuit. Defensive positions were abandoned, and Hassan himself would lead the hunt. Farouk's voice came through on the radio arguing against the decision, pointing out that dispersing their force left the compound vulnerable and that pursuing American soldiers who demonstrated superior tactical capability was inviting further disaster. Hassan's fury in response was clear. Even through Pashto, neither Chun nor her squad understood. The transmission ended and Park translated the guard channel chatter. Hassan had relieved Farouk of duty and threatened execution for anyone who questioned orders. Morrison shook his head in disbelief. "He's destroying his own command structure." Chun nodded agreement. "That's exactly what we needed him to do. When leaders make decisions based on wounded pride instead of tactical reality, their organizations collapse from internal pressure. Hassan's fighters already doubted him after the hunt failure. Now he's confirming those doubts by removing the one advisor who was giving sound counsel. The squad observed as Hassan's force mobilized in obvious chaos. Fighters assembled without clear organization, some checking equipment, while others appeared to be arguing about the orders. The discipline Chun had noted during her initial captivity had evaporated, replaced by confusion and reluctance. Hassan emerged from his command center and attempted to rally his fighters with a speech the Americans couldn't hear, but could interpret through body language. Aggressive gesturing, attempts at inspiration that fell flat, and growing frustration as his authority failed to compel the enthusiasm he demanded. Malik and his hunters appeared at the compound, their exhaustion evident even from 3 kilometers distance. Hassan approached them, and what followed was clearly confrontation rather than tactical briefing. Malik's posture showed defensive justification, while Hassan's aggressive movements indicated accusation and blame. The hunting party's other members stood apart, their body language suggesting they'd already mentally checked out from Hassan's command authority. Chun watched the dysfunction unfold through her rifle scope with professional detachment. Hassan's psychological operation had inverted completely. He wanted to break myths about American capability. Instead, he'd reinforced those myths while simultaneously destroying his own organizational cohesion. The man had perhaps 3 or 4 fighters remaining who would follow orders without question. The rest were going through motions while calculating personal survival options. Williams observed quietly that Hassan appeared to be falling apart. Chun lowered her scope and checked their route to the extraction point one final time. He's not falling apart, Williams. He's already fallen. He just doesn't realize it yet. What we're watching is the aftermath playing out. Hassan destroyed his own operation through pride and miscalculation. We just survived long enough for his mistakes to accumulate into complete failure. The squad prepared to move as Hassan's disorganized force finally began their pursuit. Chun led them along a route that utilized every tactical advantage the terrain offered, moving fast while maintaining security and keeping updated on pursuit through radio intercepts. Behind them, Hassan's command continued its collapse as fighters questioned orders, argued about direction, and generally demonstrated that organizational cohesion cannot be maintained through rage and blame. By mid-morning, Chen's squad reached their designated extraction point, a clearing that offered helicopter access and defensive positions. Morrison established security while Chun activated their emergency beacon, sending the signal that would bring coalition forces to their location within hours. Park monitored Hassan's frequencies and reported increasing chaos. Some fighters had simply abandoned the pursuit and returned to the compound. Others were lost and requesting guidance no one could provide, and Hassan himself was issuing contradictory orders that further confused an already degraded situation. Chun settled into her observation position and allowed herself the first moment of genuine rest since her capture. Hassan's demonstration had taught lessons that would resonate through the region for years. American reconnaissance specialists were exactly as capable as reputation suggested. Underestimating that capability led to tactical disaster. Most importantly, psychological operations could invert completely when the target proved more competent than anticipated. Hassan had wanted to break American mythology. Instead, he'd become a cautionary tale about the cost of hubris. The helicopters arrived 3 hours after Chun activated the emergency beacon. 2 Black Hawks, escorting a Chinook that could accommodate her entire squad, plus quick reaction force personnel. Colonel Matthews commanded the operation from the lead Black Hawk, his reputation as thorough tactician preceding him through the military community. Chun observed the aircraft approach with professional appreciation for the speed and precision of the response, recognizing that her squad's extraction was being treated as significant operation rather than routine recovery. Matthews landed first, establishing security perimeter while medics moved immediately to assess the 4 rescued soldiers. Chun provided brief tactical overview while Williams received treatment for his leg injury and Gomez was rehydrated through 4 fluids. The colonel listened without interrupting, his expression shifting from professional concern to quiet astonishment as Chun described the 36 hours from ambush through compound infiltration. When she finished, Matthews looked at her, with reassessment visible in his eyes. "Lieutenant, I read your file during flight. Your actual performance exceeded even your documentation." Morrison interjected from his position, receiving medical evaluation. "Sir," Lieutenant Chun turned Hassan's hunting demonstration into tactical seminar on specialist operations. The man wanted to prove Americans were vulnerable. "She proved we're exactly as dangerous as our training suggests." Matthews nodded slowly, already calculating the intelligence value and tactical implications of what had occurred. "We need detailed debrief from all personnel, but first priority is medical evaluation and secure transport back to Leatherneck." The flight to Camp Leatherneck took 40 minutes, time Chin used to observe her squad's condition and review her own performance for the after-action analysis she knew was coming. Morrison sat beside her, his earlier anger at her surrender completely transformed into quiet respect. He spoke just loud enough to be heard over rotor noise. "I thought you threw away our only chance when you came down from that ridge. Instead, you bought us all tickets home and destroyed Hassan's entire operation in the process." She met his eyes with steady calm. "Surrender isn't always defeat, Sergeant. Sometimes it's tactical repositioning." Camp Leatherneck's operations center had been alerted to expect their arrival. Matthews led them directly to medical facility, where thorough examinations confirmed what Chin already knew. Her squad was exhausted, dehydrated, and carrying minor injuries, but nothing that wouldn't heal with rest and proper treatment. She endured her own examination with patience, noting the doctor's surprise at her relatively good condition despite 36 hours of continuous tactical operations on minimal supplies. Matthews waited until medical cleared them before beginning formal debriefing. He assembled Chin's squad in secure conference room with intelligence analysts, operations officers, and senior NCOs who would extract every detail of their experience for tactical analysis and strategic assessment. Chin understood the process and its importance. Hassan's operation represented significant intelligence about insurgent capabilities, psychological warfare tactics, and the effectiveness of American training against unconventional threats. The debrief lasted 6 hours with multiple breaks for rest and meals. Each squad member provided their perspective on the ambush, captivity, Hassan's demonstration plan, and the subsequent hunt and extraction. Analysts asked detailed questions about Hassan's compound layout, his fighter composition, his command structure, and his psychological state as operations progressed. Morrison described Hassan's deteriorating authority. Park detailed the radio intercepts showing organizational collapse. Williams and Gomez confirmed observations about fighter morale and capability. Chin's portion of the debrief focused on tactical decisions and specialist training applications. She walked through her mountainous defensive operations, explaining how reconnaissance training translated into practical advantage when applied against numerically superior but overconfident opposition. Matthews and the senior analysts took extensive notes, recognizing immediately that her performance represented valuable case study for training enhancement and tactical doctrine development. Captain Rodriguez, an intelligence analyst specializing in insurgent operations, asked the question that had been building throughout the debrief. "Lieutenant, Hassan mentioned previous American soldiers in similar hunts. Did he provide details about those cases?" Chin nodded and recounted Hassan's claim about 3 previous victims over 14 months. Rodriguez's expression darkened as he cross-referenced his database, pulling files that confirmed 3 soldiers missing in action during the specified time frame in regions matching Hassan's operational area. Matthews absorbed this information with visible anger controlled through professional discipline. Hassan's hunting demonstration wasn't new operation. It was established pattern with American casualties. Your survival and tactical success prevented additional victims and provided intelligence that makes Hassan a high-value target for capture or elimination. Rodriguez added detail that shifted the context entirely. "Commander, Based on Lieutenant Chin's description and our existing intelligence, Hassan isn't random insurgent leader. He's former Afghan National Army colonel who defected 18 months ago with detailed knowledge of coalition tactics and American training methods. The room fell silent as implications crystallized. Hassan had insider knowledge that made his psychological warfare operations particularly dangerous because they were designed by someone who understood both sides intimately. His decision to target American soldiers for hunting demonstrations came from calculated assessment of how to degrade coalition effectiveness through morale impact and capability mythology. Chin had survived not just because of her training, but because Hassan's insider knowledge was outdated and didn't account for advances in specialist preparation. Matthews made his decision immediately. Hassan is now priority target. Rodriguez, coordinate with operations to develop capture plan using Lieutenant Chin's intelligence about his compound and force structure. I want options within 24 hours. He turned to Chun with expression that mixed respect and calculation. Lieutenant, your tactical performance and intelligence gathering have given us opportunity to eliminate significant threat. I'm recommending you for commendation and requesting your participation in mission planning, since you have most current direct knowledge of Hassan's operations. Chun accepted the assignment with professional acknowledgement, though internally she recognized the shift that had occurred. She'd gone from prisoner to weapon to strategic intelligence asset in the span of 48 hours. Hassan's attempt to demonstrate American vulnerability had instead catalyzed coalition response that would likely end his operations permanently. The irony wasn't lost on her that his psychological warfare operation had achieved exactly opposite effect from his intention. The debrief concluded with Matthews outlining next steps. Chin's squad would undergo mandatory psychological evaluation, take 72 hours mandated rest, then return to standard operations pending any requirement for their testimony in Hassan's eventual prosecution. Chin herself would consult with operations planning while maintaining reduced duty status until medical and psychological cleared her for full return. The colonel's final words carried weight that went beyond standard military acknowledgement. Lieutenant Chun, what you accomplished over the past 36 hours will be studied and taught for years. You didn't just survive impossible situation. You turned it into tactical victory and strategic intelligence windfall. After dismissal, Morrison walked with Chun toward their temporary quarters. The sergeant carried himself with the exhaustion of someone who'd been through extended crisis but survived intact. He spoke quietly as they approached the housing area. Lieutenant, when you surrendered on that ridge, I thought you'd made a fatal mistake. When you extracted us from that compound, I realized you'd been playing a completely different game than Hassan understood. Chin stopped and faced her sergeant directly. Hassan wanted to prove Americans were vulnerable. Morrison, what he actually proved was that proper training creates genuine advantage. The mythology he wanted to destroy turned out to be documented capability. Rodriguez caught up with them before they reached quarters, carrying tablet loaded with intelligence files and tactical imagery. Lieutenant, I need your input on Hassan's compound layout and approach routes for operations planning. Chun followed him to analysis room where satellite imagery displayed Hassan's facility in detail that confirmed her memorized assessment. She spent 2 hours marking positions, identifying vulnerabilities, and providing ground truth that satellite observation couldn't capture. Rodriguez took notes rapidly, his professional appreciation evident in how he engaged with her tactical perspective. When they finished, Rodriguez shared assessment that crystallized everything that had occurred. Lieutenant, Hassan made 3 critical errors. First, he underestimated specialist training based on conventional force experience. Second, he designed his operation to prove propaganda rather than accomplish tactical objectives. Third, he failed to recognize when his demonstration had inverted and pride prevented cutting losses. You exploited all 3 errors systematically. Chun considered his analysis before responding. Hassan's real error was believing training was propaganda instead of capability. Everything else flowed from that fundamental miscalculation. Night fell over Camp Leatherneck as Chun finally reached her assigned quarters. She showered, changed into clean uniform, and sat on her bunk processing the cascade of events since the ambush 36 hours earlier. Her body ached with accumulated stress and exertion. Her mind remained alert, cataloging lessons learned and tactical applications for future reference. Somewhere in the mountains, Hassan was dealing with his collapsed operation and shattered authority. His fighters had seen American specialist capability demonstrated in ways that would resonate through insurgent networks across the region. Morrison's words echoed in her mind. You were playing a completely different game than Hassan understood. That was exactly accurate. Hassan had played psychological warfare game designed around breaking mythology. Chin had played survival and tactical superiority game designed around exploiting every advantage her training provided. The games had different rules, different objectives, and different definitions of victory. Hassan had lost his game by winning hers, demonstrating American capability rather than debunking it. Sleep came eventually despite her mind's continued analysis. Tomorrow would bring mission planning, additional debriefs, and the systematic dismantling of Hassan's operation through coalition response. Tonight she allowed herself the rest her body demanded, secure in the knowledge that Hassan's demonstration had taught exactly the lessons it should have taught. American specialist training worked precisely as designed, underestimating that training carried severe consequences. Improper preparation combined with tactical discipline could transform any scenario into opportunity for mission success. Hassan had wanted to create cautionary tale about American vulnerability. Instead, he'd become the cautionary tale himself, an example of how pride and miscalculation led to catastrophic operational failure. Chun drifted toward sleep knowing that story would spread through both coalition and insurgent networks, reinforcing capability myths Hassan had intended to destroy. The weapon had proven itself. Tomorrow would determine what came next. 3 days after Chin's extraction, Matthews assembled his operations team with intelligence from multiple sources confirming Hassan's location and current disposition. The compound remained occupied, but satellite imagery showed significantly reduced personnel and increased defensive postures, suggesting Hassan expected retaliation. Rodriguez briefed the tactical picture with precision that demonstrated thorough analysis. Hassan's force is fractured. Approximately 15 fighters remain with him. Another 20 have abandoned the compound. Local informants report Hassan executed 2 fighters for desertion, which accelerated additional departures. Matthew studied the overhead imagery, while Rodriguez continued. Hassan himself has become increasingly erratic according to signals intelligence. He's making threats against local villages, demanding support that isn't materializing, and broadcasting propaganda about American cowardice that directly contradicts the story his own fighters are spreading. The psychological operation he intended has completely inverted. Instead of breaking American mythology, he's become example of what happens when you underestimate American capability. Chin sat at the conference table with her squad, all of them cleared for return to duty after psychological evaluations confirmed they'd processed their captivity without significant trauma. Morrison had joked that being rescued by your own lieutenant made captivity feel less like imprisonment and more like tactical pause. The evaluators had noted Chin's unusual stability, her clear recall of events, and her professional detachment from personal danger. One psychologist had written that specialist training appeared to provide psychological resilience alongside tactical capability. Matthews directed attention to Chun as he outlined the operation plan. Lieutenant, we're designating this Operation Reversal, which seems appropriate given how your tactical success reversed Hassan's intended demonstration. Afghan National Army will provide outer perimeter and blocking positions. We're going in with combined force. Special Forces team for primary assault, your squad for intelligence support since you know the compound layout personally, and quick reaction force for backup if Hassan's remaining fighters prove more capable than intelligence suggests. Rodriguez added critical detail that justified Chin's direct involvement. Hassan has been broadcasting specifically about Lieutenant Chun, claiming she escaped through luck rather than skill, and that his fighters will redeem themselves by recapturing her. He's fixated on salvaging his reputation through some kind of victory. This psychological investment makes him predictable. He won't abandon the compound because doing so would confirm his complete failure. He'll stay and fight because his identity is now tied to proving his demonstration wasn't wrong, just incomplete. The Special Forces team leader, Captain Walsh, acknowledged Chun with professional respect that suggested he'd read her after-action reports thoroughly. Lieutenant, your tactical employment against numerically superior force provides useful template. We'll replicate your approach by controlling engagement tempo and exploiting Hassan's psychological vulnerabilities. Difference is we're bringing overwhelming force and legal authority to capture him for prosecution on war crimes charges related to those 3 previous American soldiers. Planning consumed the entire day as operations team refined approach routes, coordinated air support, established communications protocols, and wargamed potential complications. Chun contributed detailed knowledge about compound layout, defensive positions Hassan favored, and tactical patterns she'd observed during her brief captivity and subsequent infiltration. Her input shaped the assault plan significantly, particularly regarding unexpected vulnerabilities in Hassan's security that reconnaissance satellite imagery couldn't capture. Morrison participated actively in planning, his sergeants identifying practical complications the officers might overlook. He noted that Hassan's fighters used specific radio frequencies during the hunt, suggesting they might maintain those frequencies for compound defense. Park confirmed the assessment and provided specific channel numbers from his monitoring during extraction. Walsh incorporated the intelligence immediately, assigning his communications specialist to jam those frequencies during assault while maintaining coalition nets. Night approach was selected for multiple tactical advantages: American night vision superiority, Hassan's reduced security effectiveness in darkness, and psychological impact of reversing Hassan's own night hunt against Chun. The operation would launch at 0-100 hours, giving Hassan's fighters maximum fatigue and minimum visibility, while coalition forces operated at peak capability with technological advantage. Matthews emphasized repeatedly that Hassan must be taken alive for prosecution, but authorized lethal force if he threatened American or Afghan personnel. The mission brief concluded with Matthews addressing Chun directly. "Lieutenant, you've already contributed more to this operation than anyone could reasonably expect. Your participation in actual assault is completely optional. You've earned right to watch from Operations Center, if you prefer." Chun met his eyes with calm certainty. "Sir, Hassan killed 3 American soldiers and attempted to kill 4 more, including myself. I want to be present when he's held accountable." Matthews nodded acceptance. "Then you're assigned to my command element. We'll follow primary assault and secure the objective once Special Forces clears hostile resistance." Equipment check consumed the evening hours as assault force prepared weapons, communications gear, body armor, and tactical accessories for night operations. Chun cleaned her rifle with methodical precision, her hands moving through familiar patterns that had been drilled into muscle memory through thousands of repetitions. Williams watched her work and commented quietly that she seemed unusually calm for someone about to return to place of recent captivity. Chun continued her cleaning without pause. Captivity was 3 days ago. Tonight is tactical operation with clear objective and overwhelming advantage. Context matters. 0-100 arrived with helicopters lifting from Camp Leatherneck carrying assault force toward target coordinates. Chun rode in Matthews' command bird, watching terrain pass beneath them in green-tinted night vision as they approached Hassan's compound. Radio chatter remained minimal and professional, each element confirming readiness as the formation closed on objective. Afghan forces had established outer perimeter an hour earlier, blocking escape routes and ensuring no reinforcements could reach Hassan's position. The helicopters flared for landing 2 kilometers from compound, inserting forces into positions that provided covered approaches and clear fields of fire. Walsh's Special Forces team moved first, their night vision allowing rapid advance through terrain that would have stopped conventional forces in darkness. Chun followed with Matthew's command element, moving tactically but without the aggressive speed of the assault team ahead. Morrison, Park, Williams, and Gomez deployed in security positions, their rifles oriented outward to protect the command element from unexpected threats. Walsh's voice came through radio with calm professionalism. Compound in sight. Minimal external lighting. 2 sentries visible on north wall. Both appear alert but not alarmed. Proceeding to breach positions. Matthews acknowledged and directed his element to hold position while assault team moved into final staging. Chun observed the compound through her rifle scope, noting how different it appeared when viewed as objective rather than prison. The stone buildings that had seemed threatening during captivity now looked vulnerable to coordinated military assault. The breach occurred with overwhelming speed and precision. Flashbang grenades eliminated sentry resistance, while assault team flowed through compound gates in practice formation. Hassan's fighters attempted response, but their disorganized resistance collapsed against professional military operation conducted with night vision advantage and superior training. Radio reports came rapid fire as Walsh's team cleared buildings systematically, securing prisoners and eliminating threats with discrimination that separated combatants from civilians. Hassan himself was located in his command center, attempting to organize defense through radio calls that went unanswered by fighters who'd already surrendered or fled. Walsh's team breached the command center and secured Hassan without lethal force, the former Afghan colonel offering token resistance before accepting the inevitability of capture. Walsh's report was professionally satisfied. Target secured. No friendly casualties. 15 enemy combatants detained. Compound is secure for command element advance. Matthews led his element forward with Chun beside him, their movement bringing them through gates she'd escaped 3 days earlier under very different circumstances. The compound looked smaller now, less threatening when illuminated by American tactical lights and secured by overwhelming force. Detained fighters sat in organized rows, flexicuffed and guarded while intelligence personnel processed them for questioning. Several recognized Chun, and their expressions showed recognition mixed with something approaching respect rather than hostility. Hassan was brought out in restraints, his theatrical confidence completely stripped away and replaced with barely suppressed rage. He saw Chun standing beside Matthews, and his fury erupted in accented English directed specifically at her. You proved nothing. Your escape was luck and chaos. My demonstration remains valid. American capability is mythology supported by technology, not genuine tactical superiority. Chun regarded him with professional detachment before responding in voice that carried to every detained fighter within hearing. Your demonstration proved exactly what it should have proved, Hassan. Proper training creates measurable advantage. Underestimating that training leads to operational failure. Your fighters know this truth now because they experienced it directly. Matthews stepped forward before Hassan could respond. Hassan Durrani, you're detained on suspicion of war crimes, including torture and murder of American military personnel. You will be transported to Bagram for processing and eventual trial. Your operation here is concluded. Hassan's fury collapsed into bitter recognition that his attempt to salvage reputation through defiance had failed as completely as his original demonstration. His fighters had watched American forces dismantle his compound in minutes, proving everything Chun had demonstrated during her mountain operations. Rodriguez approached with tablet showing initial intelligence gathered from compound search. Commander, we've recovered files documenting 3 previous American soldiers Hassan captured and killed. The evidence confirms Lieutenant Chen's intelligence and provides basis for war crimes prosecution. Additionally, we found Hassan's planning documents for his psychological warfare demonstration. His own notes acknowledged that previous victims were standard infantry and that Lieutenant Chen represented first specialist operator he captured. He knew she was different and underestimated her anyway. Matthews examined the evidence before directing Rodriguez to secure all materials for legal proceedings. This documentation, combined with Lieutenant Chin's testimony and our tactical success tonight, will ensure Hassan faces appropriate consequences. The colonel turned to Chun with expression, mixing command authority and personal respect. Lieutenant, your tactical performance turned Hassan's psychological warfare operation into its own refutation. His demonstration proved American specialist training works exactly as designed. That lesson will resonate through both coalition and insurgent networks for years. The compound secured and prisoners loaded for transport, Matthews assembled his force for extraction brief. Afghan forces would maintain security pending full intelligence exploitation and compound demolition. American forces were returning to Leatherneck with Hassan and 14 detained fighters for processing. The operation had achieved all objectives without friendly casualties, captured high-value target responsible for multiple American deaths, and gathered substantial intelligence about insurgent psychological warfare tactics. Chin rode the helicopter back to base with her squad, watching Hassan's compound disappear into darkness behind them. Morrison spoke over internal communications. 3 days ago, we were prisoners in that compound. Tonight, we helped capture the man who held us. Context really does matter. Chin nodded agreement, while checking her rifle was safe and secured. Hassan wanted to break the myth of American capability. What he actually did was validate every principle our training teaches. Preparation defeats numbers. Discipline defeats aggression. Training defeats confidence that isn't backed by genuine skill. Camp Leatherneck's operations center erupted in controlled celebration as assault force returned with Hassan secured and 0 casualties sustained. Matthews debriefed senior command while Hassan was processed through detention facility. Intelligence personnel began detailed exploitation of captured materials and interrogation of detained fighters. The operation that had begun with Chin's ambush and captivity had concluded with comprehensive tactical success and strategic victory that would influence regional operations for months. Chin cleaned her weapon and secured her gear before finally heading to quarters as dawn approached. She'd survived captivity, escaped through tactical excellence, provided intelligence that enabled Hassan's capture, and participated in an operation that brought war criminal to justice. Hassan's demonstration had taught its lessons after all, just not the lessons he'd intended. American specialist training created genuine tactical advantage, underestimating that capability carried severe consequences. And proper preparation could transform any scenario, even captivity and forced hunt, into opportunity for mission success and strategic victory. The weapon had proven itself through every phase of operations, from defensive mountain tactics to offensive compound infiltration to supporting military justice. Hassan had released her believing she was prey. She'd proven she was precisely what her training intended, a soldier capable of turning any situation into tactical advantage. Hassan's transfer to Bagram detention facility occurred under maximum security 3 days after his capture. The former Afghan colonel now facing formal charges that included torture, murder, and violations of the laws of war. Military prosecutors assembled their case using evidence recovered from his compound. Detailed logs documenting 3 previous American soldiers captured and killed, planning documents outlining his psychological warfare demonstrations, and testimony from his own fighters who described the hunting operations in exchange for reduced charges. The case against Hassan was comprehensive and damning. Rodriguez coordinated the investigation from Camp Leatherneck, his intelligence analysis expanding beyond Hassan's immediate operations to reveal broader patterns. Commander, Hassan's psychological warfare approach wasn't isolated. We've identified 4 other insurgent leaders who attempted similar operations over the past 2 years, all targeting American soldiers for demonstration purposes. Hassan's was most sophisticated because of his insider knowledge, but the strategy appears coordinated at higher levels. This suggests systematic attempt to degrade coalition effectiveness through morale impact. Matthews absorbed the intelligence with recognition that Chin's survival had disrupted more than single operation. Lieutenant Chin's tactical success didn't just stop Hassan. It demonstrated to entire insurgent network that these psychological warfare operations carry severe risk. Hassan's captured fighters are spreading story throughout the region. American specialists who turned hunt into tactical victory destroyed experienced fighters' confidence and led to commanders' capture. That narrative undermines the exact psychological advantage Hassan was trying to create. Chin participated in prosecutor meetings as key witness, her testimony providing detailed account of Hassan's operations and his explicit statements about previous victims. The lead prosecutor, Major Stevens, recorded her account with meticulous attention to detail that would support courtroom presentation. Your testimony establishes Hassan's intent, his knowledge that previous operations resulted in American deaths, and his deliberate decision to continue pattern with your squad. Combined with documentary evidence and fighter testimony, this builds compelling case for premeditated war crimes. Farouk, Hassan's former second-in-command, provided critical testimony during his own processing. The scarred veteran had surrendered immediately during compound assault and requested protective custody in exchange for cooperation. His interview with Rodriguez revealed Hassan's psychological deterioration during Chin's mountain operations. Commander became obsessed with recapturing the American woman. He knew his authority was collapsing, but couldn't accept that his demonstration had failed. When she escaped compound, he threatened to execute all of us if we didn't recapture her immediately. His judgment was completely compromised by wounded pride. Rodriguez documented Farouk's account carefully, recognizing its value for psychological assessment of insurgent leadership vulnerabilities. Hassan's pride prevented him from accepting tactical reality. He designed operation to prove Americans were vulnerable, and when that operation proved opposite, he couldn't adapt because adaptation would mean admitting fundamental error. This psychological rigidity created exploitable weakness that Lieutenant Chun recognized and exploited systematically. The three families of Hassan's previous victims received notification that their soldier's killer had been captured and would face prosecution. Rodriguez coordinated with casualty affairs officers to ensure families understood the evidence and the likelihood of successful prosecution. Two families requested opportunity to observe trial proceedings. The third family's father, a retired Marine colonel, traveled to Bagram specifically to thank Chin personally for actions that enabled justice for his son. Colonel Marcus Reeves met Chun in Matthew's office with dignity that barely contained his grief and gratitude. "Lieutenant, my son was captured 14 months ago during routine patrol. We were told he died in ambush. Now we know Hassan tortured and killed him as part of psychological demonstration. Your survival and tactical success ensured Hassan will face accountability." Reeves extended his hand, and Chin accepted with quiet respect. "Sir, your son deserved better than what Hassan inflicted. I'm glad my actions contributed to bringing his killer to justice." Reeves studied Chun with assessment born from decades of military experience. "I read your after-action reports. You turned impossible situation into tactical victory through preparation and discipline. My son had courage, but Hassan ambushed conventional infantry who weren't trained for specialist resistance. You had training that made the difference between Hassan's fourth victim and his downfall. That training honored my son's sacrifice by ensuring no more families would suffer what mine has endured." Matthews offered Reeves full briefing on Hassan's capture and prosecution timeline. The trial would proceed within 90 days under military tribunal rules. Evidence was overwhelming, and Hassan's own documentation provided irrefutable proof of his crimes. Conviction was virtually certain, with appropriate sentencing likely to be life imprisonment or death penalty, depending on tribunal findings. Reeves accepted the information with grim satisfaction before departing with promise to attend trial proceedings. Chin returned to standard reconnaissance duties while Hassan's prosecution advanced through military legal system. Her squad resumed operations with cohesion strengthened by their shared experience of captivity and tactical success. Morrison led with renewed confidence born from watching his lieutenant transform desperate situation into strategic victory. Hark, Williams, and Gomez operated as team whose trust had been forged through crisis that would have broken less disciplined soldiers. 6 weeks after Hassan's capture, Rodriguez compiled comprehensive analysis of the operation's strategic impact. His report documented measurable reduction in capture attempts against American soldiers across the region, citing intercepted communications showing insurgent leaders discussing Hassan's fate as cautionary example. The psychological warfare strategy Hassan had championed was abandoned by other commanders who recognized the operational risk outweighed potential benefit. Chin's tactical performance had effectively ended an entire category of insurgent operations. Matthews called Chun to his office to review Rodriguez's findings. "Lieutenant, your actions created strategic impact far beyond immediate tactical victory. Hassan's capture stopped his operations, but the story of how he was defeated has influenced insurgent decision-making across multiple networks. You didn't just survive his demonstration. You turned it into strategic deterrent that's protecting American soldiers you'll never meet. That's textbook example of tactical excellence creating strategic advantage." The conversation shifted to Chin's future as Matthews outlined opportunities her performance had generated. Reconnaissance Command wanted her for instructor duty at specialist training facilities. Special Operations Recruiting had expressed interest in her capabilities. Rodriguez had requested her participation in psychological warfare analysis projects. Matthews presented options with acknowledgement that her choices would shape her career trajectory significantly. Chun considered the possibilities before responding with characteristic clarity. "Sir, I appreciate the opportunities, but my preference is to remain in operational reconnaissance role. Training and analysis are important, but field operations are where specialist skills have direct impact. Hassan targeted me because I was reconnaissance specialist. I prove that designation means exactly what it claims. I'd like to continue proving that through operational employment rather than institutional assignments." Matthews smiled with understanding that suggested he'd anticipated her response. "I thought you'd say that. For what it's worth, I agree completely. Your value is maximized in field operations where your capabilities can be employed directly. However, you should know that your performance has drawn attention at levels where assignments aren't always negotiable. Senior command wants proven specialists in positions where their experience can be multiplied through training and doctrine development. The institutional tension between operational employment and strategic multiplication of capability through training was familiar to specialists throughout military. Chun understood the logic even as she preferred field work. She'd become case study in successful application of specialist training under extreme conditions. That made her valuable as instructor who could teach from direct experience rather than theoretical knowledge. The question was whether organizational needs would override her preference for operational assignment. Rodriguez entered Matthews' office with tablet showing updated intelligence. "Commander, Lieutenant, Hassan's trial date is confirmed. Tribunal convenes in 3 weeks. Prosecution requests Lieutenant Chin's testimony during opening phases to establish timeline and Hassan's intent. Trial is expected to last 4 days with verdict likely within hours after closing arguments. Hassan's defense attorney has indicated his client will not testify and will present minimal defense, apparently recognizing evidence is insurmountable." Matthews directed Rodriguez to coordinate Chin's travel to Bagram for trial testimony. "Lieutenant, this will be final phase of Hassan's operation. Your testimony will ensure his conviction and provide closure for families of his victims. After trial concludes, we'll address your next assignment. For now, focus on preparation for testimony and continued operational duties. The military legal system will handle justice. Your responsibility is ensuring the tribunal understands exactly what Hassan did and why his actions constitute war crimes." Chun spent the following weeks balancing operational duties with trial preparation. Prosecutors walked her through testimony multiple times, ensuring she understood courtroom procedures and could present her account clearly without emotional bias. Major Stevens emphasized that her professional demeanor would strengthen prosecution case by demonstrating Hassan's victims weren't helpless targets, but trained soldiers who Hassan deliberately chose to hunt for psychological warfare purposes. Morrison and her squad provided support through informal discussions that helped Chun process the experience from new perspectives. Park noted that Hassan's fundamental error was treating specialist training as propaganda rather than documented capability. Williams observed that Hassan's pride prevented him from recognizing when his operation had failed, leading to escalating decisions that ensured his capture. Gomez summarized the lesson they'd all learned. Proper training creates advantage that persists even in worse tactical situations. The evening before Chin's departure for Bagram, Matthews assembled her squad for informal recognition. He presented each soldier with command coin and personal letter commending their conduct during captivity and subsequent operations. When he reached Chun, Matthews spoke words intended for the entire squad. Lieutenant Chun, your tactical performance under impossible conditions exemplifies everything specialist training aims to achieve. You transformed captivity into intelligence gathering, forced hunt into tactical victory, and individual survival into strategic impact. Hassan wanted to prove American training was mythology. You proved it was precisely calibrated preparation for exactly the scenarios we face. Chun accepted the recognition with quiet acknowledgement while understanding the deeper significance. Hassan's psychological warfare operation had indeed taught lessons that would resonate through military networks for years. Those lessons validated training programs, justified specialist designations, and reinforced the principle that proper preparation created measurable tactical advantage. Hassan had become cautionary tale about underestimating American capability, and his trial would formalize that narrative through legal judgment that carried institutional weight beyond tactical victory. As Chun prepared for travel to Bagram and testimony that would ensure Hassan's conviction, she reflected on the transformation her squad had experienced. They'd been ambushed, captured, threatened with death, and used as leverage in psychological warfare operation. Through discipline, training, and tactical excellence, they'd survived and turned their captivity into strategic victory that protected future American soldiers from similar operations. Hassan had released her believing she was prey for his demonstration. She'd proven she was weapon that dismantled everything he'd built. Tomorrow's testimony would complete that demonstration through legal process that honored Hassan's victims while validating the training that made tactical success possible even in impossible circumstances. Bagram's military tribunal courtroom occupied a secure facility designed for high-profile prosecutions of war crimes and terrorism cases. Chun arrived 2 days before testimony to review procedures and coordinate with prosecutors who'd built their case around documentary evidence, fighter testimony, and her direct account of Hassan's operations. Major Stevens walked her through the courtroom layout, explaining where she'd sit during testimony and how defense counsel might attempt to challenge her credibility or suggest her tactical success was luck rather than training. The tribunal consisted of 3 senior military officers, a colonel from JAG Corps, a lieutenant colonel with combat experience in Afghanistan, and a major who specialized in international law. They would evaluate evidence, hear testimony, and render judgment on charges that included torture, murder, and violations of laws protecting prisoners of war. Hassan faced potential death penalty if convicted on all counts, though prosecutors considered life imprisonment more likely given complexities of international military law. Chun spent her preparation time reviewing her own after-action reports, ensuring her testimony would align with documented timeline, while providing human context that cold reports couldn't capture. Stevens emphasized the importance of her professional demeanor. Your testimony establishes Hassan's intent and methodology. Defense will try to portray his operations as legitimate military action against combatants. Your account proves he deliberately targeted soldiers for torture and execution as psychological warfare, making his actions war crimes rather than combat operations. The trial opened with prosecution outlining charges and presenting evidence recovered from Hassan's compound. Documents showed Hassan's explicit planning for psychological warfare demonstrations, his tracking of previous American captures, and his assessment that specialist operators would provide maximum psychological impact when defeated. The tribunal examined materials carefully, asking clarifying questions about translation accuracy and document authentication. Hassan sat impassively throughout, his theatrical confidence replaced by stony silence. Farouk testified on the second day, his account providing insider perspective on Hassan's decision-making and psychological state. The former second-in-command described how Hassan had become obsessed with proving American capability was mythology, how he'd rejected tactical advice when operations began failing, and how his authority collapsed as fighters recognized his judgment was compromised. Defense counsel attempted to portray Farouk as disloyal subordinate seeking favor through false testimony. But cross-examination revealed Farouk's account aligned perfectly with documentary evidence and other fighters' statements. Chen's testimony began on the third morning. Stevens led her through chronological accounts starting with ambush, proceeding through captivity and Hassan's explanation of his demonstration, then covering the hunt operations and her subsequent tactical responses. She described each phase clearly and professionally, avoiding emotional language while ensuring the tribunal understood Hassan's explicit intent to capture, hunt, and ultimately kill American soldiers for psychological warfare purposes. Defense counsel, a captain assigned to ensure Hassan received adequate representation despite overwhelming evidence, challenged Chen's account during cross-examination. Captain Morrison focused on suggesting her escape was fortune rather than training, that Hassan's fighters were incompetent rather than outmatched, and that her interpretation of Hassan's intent was subjective rather than factual. Chen responded to each challenge with calm reference to specific training applications, tactical decisions based on reconnaissance doctrine, and Hassan's own recorded statements about his demonstration's purpose. The tribunal's combat-experienced lieutenant colonel asked Chen to elaborate on specialist training's role in her survival. Lieutenant, defense suggests your tactical success resulted primarily from enemy incompetence. Please explain how your training specifically enabled your performance during captivity and subsequent operations. Chen's response was detailed and educational, walking through reconnaissance specialist curriculum elements she'd employed: terrain analysis, defensive position preparation, psychological warfare applications, improvised equipment use, and systematic exploitation of enemy overconfidence. Her testimony consumed 4 hours, including cross-examination and tribunal questions. When Stevens indicated he had no further questions, Chen was excused with acknowledgement from the senior colonel that her account had been exceptionally clear and professionally delivered. Hassan watched her exit without expression, his silence maintained throughout testimony that effectively destroyed any claim his operations were legitimate military action rather than deliberate war crimes. Rodriguez testified after Chen, providing intelligence analysis that contextualized Hassan's operations within broader, insurgent psychological warfare strategy. He presented evidence of 4 other commanders who'd attempted similar demonstrations, described the systematic nature of targeting American soldiers for propaganda purposes, and explained how Hassan's capture had effectively ended these operations throughout the region. The tribunal absorbed this information with visible interest, recognizing they were judging not just individual crimes, but systematic strategy that threatened American personnel. The families of Hassan's 3 previous victims attended testimony, their presence providing silent witness to crimes that had taken their sons. Colonel Reeves sat in gallery with military bearing that couldn't conceal his grief, listening as prosecutors detailed how Hassan had tortured and killed captured soldiers specifically to create psychological impact. When prosecution rested its case, Reeves approached Chen outside the courtroom and spoke words heavy with meaning. Your testimony honored my son by ensuring his killer faces full accountability. Thank you for surviving what he couldn't, and for using that survival to bring justice. Defense presented minimal case as anticipated, calling only character witnesses who described Hassan's pre-defection service in Afghan National Army and his stated motivations for opposing coalition presence. Captain Morrison argued that Hassan's actions, while severe, occurred within context of asymmetric warfare, where conventional rules didn't clearly apply. The argument carried little weight against documentary evidence of torture, execution, and deliberate targeting of prisoners for psychological warfare rather than legitimate military objectives. Closing arguments occupied the fourth day. Stevens methodically reviewed evidence showing Hassan's deliberate planning, his explicit statements about demonstration purposes, his knowledge that previous captures had resulted in deaths, and his decision to continue operations despite that knowledge. Hassan's own documentation proved premeditation and intent beyond reasonable doubt. Defense counsel argued for lenient interpretation based on combat stress and cultural context, but his presentation lacked conviction given evidence's overwhelming nature. The tribunal deliberated for 3 hours before returning with verdict. Hassan was found guilty on all charges: torture of prisoners, murder of 3 American soldiers, violations of laws of war, and conspiracy to commit war crimes. The senior colonel read judgment with formal precision that emphasized the legal foundation for each finding. Sentencing would occur after victim impact statements and additional evidence review, but conviction was unequivocal and comprehensive. Hassan's reaction to verdict was barely controlled rage that erupted when tribunal adjourned. He shouted in Pashto that his demonstration had been valid, that American soldiers were vulnerable despite mythology, and that his conviction proved only that coalition controlled legal proceedings through superior force. Guards restrained him and removed him from courtroom, while families of his victims watched with expressions mixing satisfaction and grief. Matthews attended final day of trial and met Chun afterward with assessment that balanced legal victory against continuing operational requirements. Lieutenant, Hassan's conviction closes this chapter definitively. His operations are ended, his fighters are scattered or detained, and insurgent networks have abandoned psychological warfare strategy he championed. Your tactical performance and subsequent testimony ensured comprehensive resolution. Now we address your next assignment. The institutional question of Chen's future had been resolved during trial proceedings through decisions made at command levels above Matthews' authority. Chen was being reassigned to Specialist Training Command as Senior Instructor for Reconnaissance and Survival Programs. Her direct experience surviving and reversing Hassan's operation made her uniquely qualified to teach techniques that could save lives in similar scenarios. Matthews delivered the assignment orders with understanding that Chun would prefer operational duty, but acknowledging organizational logic. Chun accepted the orders with professional acknowledgement despite personal preference for field operations. Sir, I understand the reasoning. My experience provides teaching value that multiplies capability beyond individual operations. I'll execute the assignment to standard. Matthews responded with respect that went beyond command courtesy. Lieutenant, institutional assignments aren't punishment. They're recognition that your capabilities can protect more soldiers through training than through continued individual operations. Hassan wanted to prove training was mythology. You proved it was life-saving preparation. Now you'll ensure other soldiers receive that same preparation. Rodriguez joined them with final intelligence update. Hassan's sentencing hearing is scheduled for next month. Prosecution will seek life imprisonment given his documented crimes and the deterrent value his continued detention provides. His fighters have completely abandoned his cause, several actively cooperating with coalition forces in exchange for reduced charges. The psychological warfare strategy he championed is effectively dead throughout the region because his fate demonstrates the operational risk outweighs any potential benefit. Chun departed Bagram the following day, her testimony complete and Hassan's conviction secured. The flight back to Camp Leatherneck provided time for reflection on transformation her squad had experienced over 6 weeks. They'd gone from ambush victims to tactical survivors to prosecution witnesses who'd enabled justice for multiple families. Hassan had attempted to demonstrate American vulnerability and instead had proven American training created genuine advantage, even in impossible circumstances. Morrison and her squad waited at Leatherneck when she arrived, their presence indicating they'd coordinated to welcome her return. The sergeant spoke words that reflected their collective sentiment. "Lieutenant, Hassan tried to make us victims of his psychological warfare. You turned us into evidence of why American training works." The man wanted to destroy mythology. He ended up validating everything we're taught about preparation, discipline, and tactical excellence. Chun acknowledged the assessment while redirecting credit. Hassan destroyed himself through pride and miscalculation. We just survived long enough for his errors to compound into complete failure. The squad's cohesion had been forged through crisis that would define their service for years. They'd learned that proper training provided genuine advantage, that specialist designations reflected actual capability, and that tactical excellence could transform any scenario into opportunity for mission success. Hassan had become their shared cautionary tale about underestimating American soldiers, while Chun had become their example of what specialist training achieved when properly applied under impossible conditions. Matthews assembled the squad for final recognition before Chen's transfer to training command. He presented unit citation for their conduct during captivity and subsequent operations, emphasizing how their discipline and tactical performance had strategic impact beyond immediate survival. When he addressed Chun specifically, his words carried command authority mixed with personal respect. "Lieutenant Chun, you transformed captivity into tactical victory and personal survival into strategic deterrent." Hassan's conviction closes his operations permanently. Your reassignment to training command ensures the lessons you learn protecting yourself will protect countless other soldiers facing similar threats. Chun accepted the recognition while understanding her role was shifting from operational employment to institutional multiplication of capability. Hassan had wanted to prove specialist training was propaganda. She'd proven it was precisely calibrated preparation that created measurable advantage. Now, she would ensure future specialists received training informed by direct experience rather than theoretical doctrine. The weapon would become the teacher, ensuring Hassan's attempted demonstration taught its proper lessons to generations of soldiers who would benefit from hard-won knowledge purchased through tactical excellence under impossible circumstances. 6 weeks after Hassan's conviction, Joint Special Operations Command Headquarters convened classified briefing for senior training personnel across multiple specialist programs. Chun stood at the front of secure conference room surrounded by colonels, sergeant majors, and civilian contractors responsible for developing curriculum that prepared soldiers for unconventional warfare scenarios. The briefing's purpose was straightforward: analyze Chen's tactical performance during Hassan's operation and extract lessons for immediate integration into training programs. The presentation began with operational timeline displayed on screens showing her capture through final extraction. Senior instructor Colonel Davies led discussion, his decades of special operations experience providing context for Chen's decisions. Lieutenant Chen's performance demonstrates textbook application of reconnaissance, specialist training under conditions designed to ensure failure. Hassan's operations specifically targeted trained personnel, provided minimal resources, and employed numerically superior force with local terrain knowledge. Standard doctrine suggests survival probability near zero. Lieutenant Chun not only survived, but reversed the tactical situation completely. Davies directed attention to specific decision points where Chen's training created measurable advantage. First critical decision was surrender to protect her sergeant. Standard survival doctrine might suggest maintaining freedom and attempting rescue later. Lieutenant Chun recognized that immediate surrender preserved team integrity and provided intelligence gathering opportunity during captivity. This decision prioritized long-term tactical advantage over short-term individual security. Chun supplemented Davies' analysis with direct explanation of her reasoning process. "Sir, Hassan's demonstration required American prisoners for leverage and psychological impact. Remaining free meant my squad faced execution without my ability to influence outcomes. Surrender gave me access to intelligence about Hassan's plan, his compound layout, and his fighters' capabilities. That intelligence became foundation for everything that followed. The assembled training personnel absorbed this lesson with recognition that standard doctrine required modification. Sergeant Major Williams, who'd spent 30 years developing resistance training curriculum, spoke from his position at the table. We teach survival through evasion. Lieutenant Chun survived through controlled engagement. That's doctrinal shift with significant implications for how we prepare specialists for capture scenarios. Instead of emphasizing escape, we should emphasize intelligence exploitation and tactical reversal. Davies advanced to second decision point. Chin's preparation during the 3-hour head start before hunters began pursuit. Hassan expected exhausted flight. Lieutenant Chun used terrain reconnaissance to establish defensive positions, identify choke points, and prepare a battlefield for systematic engagement. This transformed pursuit into defensive operation where she controlled tempo and engagement parameters. The screens displayed satellite imagery showing the mountain terrain and Chin's confirmed positions during operations. Chin described her tactical planning process. Hassan gave me detailed map during his briefing, showing the operational area he expected me to use for evasion. I memorized terrain features, identified defensive positions, and planned fallback routes before release. When hunters began pursuit, I already owned the battlefield because I'd invested preparation time rather than distance. The training personnel recognized immediately that this approach required doctrinal emphasis on rapid terrain analysis and defensive position preparation. Third decision point focused on Chin's choice to acquire weapons through tactical engagement rather than extended evasion. Davies highlighted this as departure from standard doctrine that emphasized avoiding contact until extraction possible. Lieutenant Chin recognized that Hassan's psychological operation required demonstrating superior capability rather than simply surviving until rescue. Her decision to eliminate first hunter and acquire weapons shifted the operational dynamic from evasion to controlled engagement. Chun explained the calculation behind weapon acquisition. Hassan's demonstration required proving American soldiers were vulnerable when stripped of technological advantages. Remaining unarmed would have validated his premise regardless of how long I evaded. Acquiring weapons through tactical engagement proved that training created advantage independent of equipment. Every subsequent engagement reinforced that message until Hassan's fighters understood their commander had fundamentally miscalculated. The discussion shifted to psychological warfare applications. Chin's use of captured radio to communicate directly with hunters and Hassan. This represented sophisticated employment of psychological operations beyond standard specialist training. Davies noted that Chin's radio transmissions created doubt, eroded confidence, and accelerated the hunter's organizational collapse. Lieutenant, where did you learn psychological warfare tactics at this level? Chin's response was direct. Sir, reconnaissance training includes assessment of enemy morale and capability. I applied those assessment skills offensively by identifying vulnerabilities and exploiting them through calculated messaging. Sergeant Major Williams proposed immediate curriculum modification. We need to integrate offensive psychological operations into specialist training. Lieutenant Chun demonstrated that properly employed psychological warfare multiplies tactical advantage by degrading enemy effectiveness without additional resource expenditure. Every specialist should receive training in identifying and exploiting enemy psychological vulnerabilities during operations. Davies advanced to Chin's compound infiltration and squad extraction, emphasizing how she maintained operational tempo despite completing primary survival objective. Hassan expected exhausted soldier focused solely on personal safety. Lieutenant Chun executed offensive operation against defended position, extracted her entire squad, and destroyed critical infrastructure while Hassan's forces were psychologically defeated and physically exhausted from failed pursuit. Chun described the infiltration planning. Hassan's compound security was designed against external assault, not internal infiltration by someone who'd already been held there. I'd memorized the layout, guard patterns, and infrastructure vulnerabilities during my initial captivity. The fuel sabotage created chaos that enabled extraction without direct combat. Training emphasizes using enemy assumptions against them. Hassan assumed I'd run from his compound, not infiltrate it for rescue operation. The senior training personnel spent 2 hours examining specific techniques Chun had employed, identifying which derived from existing curriculum and which represented innovative applications requiring formal doctrine development. Davies compiled a preliminary list of training modifications: enhanced emphasis on terrain preparation over distance evasion, integration of offensive psychological operations, doctrine for tactical reversal after capture, and techniques for infrastructure exploitation during compound operations. Colonel Peters from Advanced Reconnaissance Programs raised the strategic question underlying the entire analysis. Lieutenant Chen's performance was exceptional, but how do we determine whether it represents reproducible capability or individual excellence beyond normal training outcomes? The question was fundamental. Could Chen's tactical success be systematically taught, or was she a statistical outlier whose performance couldn't be reliably replicated? Davies addressed the question with assessment based on Chen's demonstrated techniques. Every tactical decision Lieutenant Chen made derived from documented training curriculum. Terrain analysis, defensive position preparation, weapon acquisition, psychological warfare, compound infiltration all exist within current specialist doctrine. What distinguished her performance was disciplined application under extreme stress and innovative combination of techniques across multiple operational phases. That suggests reproducibility through enhanced training emphasis rather than unique individual capability. Chun contributed her perspective. Sir, I didn't invent new tactics. I applied existing training to specific scenario Hassan created. Any properly trained specialist with similar preparation would have access to same tactical options. The difference might be in aggressive application rather than passive survival focus. Hassan expected desperate evasion. I provided calculated engagement because my training had prepared me for exactly that approach. Sergeant Major Williams synthesized the discussion into practical recommendation. We modified doctrine to emphasize aggressive tactical employment during survival scenarios rather than passive evasion. We integrate offensive psychological operations as standard skill set. We train specialists to view capture as intelligence opportunity and potential tactical reversal rather than simply crisis to escape. Lieutenant Chun proved these approaches work. Our responsibility is ensuring future specialists receive training that makes this performance standard rather than exceptional. The briefing concluded with Davies outlining implementation timeline. Modified curriculum would enter testing within 30 days using Chen's operation as case study and simulation framework. Specialist candidates would train against scenarios modeled on Hassan's operation, learning to identify and exploit enemy psychological vulnerabilities while maintaining tactical initiative even under apparent disadvantage. Chun would serve as senior instructor, providing direct experience perspective that would inform training development. After dismissal, Davies spoke with Chun privately about her transition from operational employment to institutional role. Lieutenant, I understand field operations preference. Training assignments feel like sideline compared to direct action. But consider the multiplication factor. Hassan captured and tried to kill you specifically. Your survival and tactical success protect you alone. Training 1,000 specialists to employ your techniques protects 1,000 soldiers and creates strategic deterrent that influences enemy decision-making across entire theater. Chun acknowledged the logic while maintaining honest assessment of personal preference. Sir, I recognize the institutional value. Teaching feels less immediate than operational employment, but the strategic impact is undeniable. If my experience prevents other soldiers from facing Hassan's scenario or ensures they survive if they do face it, then training assignments serves broader mission effectively. Davies nodded understanding. That recognition separates good soldiers from great ones. Mission always matters more than personal preference. The specialist training facility occupied secure compound designed for realistic scenario training under control conditions. Chun arrived to find her curriculum development team already assembled. 3 experienced instructors who'd reviewed her after-action reports and Hassan trial testimony, 2 psychologists specializing in stress response and decision-making, and 1 retired Special Forces operator who'd survived his own capture experience and spent subsequent career teaching resistance techniques. Her primary responsibility focused on developing tactical reversal doctrine that taught specialists to view survival scenarios as offensive opportunities rather than defensive crises. The curriculum would emphasize rapid terrain exploitation, aggressive psychological warfare employment, systematic acquisition of enemy resources, and calculated risk-taking that transformed numerical disadvantage into tactical advantage through superior preparation and execution. Training scenarios replicated Hassan's operation with modifications that tested different specialist responses under varying conditions. Candidates were ambushed, captured, briefed on hunting demonstration, then released into controlled terrain against trained opposition force. Success was measured not by evasion time, but by tactical decisions that demonstrated aggressive employment of specialist skills. Candidates who simply ran received failing marks. Those who prepared defensive positions, acquired opposition weapons, and employed psychological warfare against hunters received recognition. Chun observed initial training iterations with critical eye toward realism and tactical validity. Some candidates struggled with doctrinal shift from passive survival to active engagement. Others embraced aggressive approach, but made tactical errors that would have resulted in capture or death in actual operations. The curriculum required continuous refinement to balance aggression with discipline, ensuring specialists understood when to engage and when tactical situation demanded evasion. Morrison visited during 3rd week of curriculum development, his presence reminding Chun of the squad whose survival had made this training possible. The sergeant observed scenario training and spoke privately with Chun about translation from field experience to institutional doctrine. Lieutenant, watching these candidates train using your tactical approach proves that what you did wasn't luck or individual excellence. It was application of proper doctrine under conditions where doctrine gets tested for real. These soldiers are learning what you proved in those mountains. That training creates genuine advantage when properly employed. Chun accepted the assessment while recognizing the responsibility her role carried. Every specialist who graduates this program carries lessons purchased through our experience. Hassan tried to prove training was mythology. We proved it was life-saving preparation. Now we ensure that preparation becomes standard rather than exceptional. Morrison nodded agreement before adding observation that crystallized the transformation they'd experienced. Hassan released you believing you were prey for his demonstration. You proved you were a weapon he couldn't control. Now you're teaching other soldiers to become weapons that survive what would have killed previous generations. That's legacy worth more than any individual operation. The institutional multiplication of capability through training represented shift from tactical excellence to strategic impact. Chun had survived Hassan's operation through disciplined application of specialist training. Now she would ensure thousands of future specialists receive training informed by direct experience rather than theoretical doctrine. Hassan's attempt to demonstrate American vulnerability had instead created training revolution that made vulnerability significantly less likely for generations of soldiers who would benefit from lessons extracted through tactical excellence under impossible circumstances. 3 months after Hassan's conviction, Rodriguez compiled comprehensive after-action analysis showing measurable strategic impact across the entire operational theater. His report documented 42% reduction in capture attempts against American soldiers, attributed directly to Hassan's fate circulating through insurgent networks as cautionary tale. Intelligence intercepts revealed multiple commanders explicitly referencing the American specialist who'd reversed hunting demonstration, destroyed experienced fighters' confidence and led to war crimes prosecution. The psychological warfare strategy Hassan had championed was effectively abandoned throughout the region. Matthews reviewed Rodriguez's findings with satisfaction that went beyond tactical victory. Hassan's operation was designed to degrade American effectiveness through psychological impact. Lieutenant Chen's tactical success achieved opposite effect by reinforcing capability Miss Hassan tried to destroy. Enemy commanders now factor specialist training into operational planning rather than dismissing it as propaganda. That behavioral change protects American personnel more effectively than additional force deployment. Chen's training curriculum entered full implementation with first specialist candidates graduating under modified doctrine emphasizing tactical reversal and aggressive psychological warfare employment. Davies supervised graduation ceremony where 12 newly qualified reconnaissance specialists demonstrated capabilities that previous training generations hadn't possessed. These soldiers had learned to view survival scenarios as offensive opportunities, to exploit enemy psychological vulnerabilities systematically, and to maintain tactical initiative even under apparent disadvantage. The graduation briefing included case study presentation where candidates analyzed Hassan's operation and Chen's responses through multiple tactical lenses. They identified decision points where aggressive engagement proved superior to passive evasion, moments where psychological warfare multiplied tactical advantage, and situations where enemy overconfidence created exploitable vulnerabilities. The analysis demonstrated that Chen's performance wasn't individual excellence beyond replication, but rather disciplined application of teachable doctrine under extreme conditions. Morrison attended graduation representing Chen's original squad, his presence symbolizing continuity between field operations and institutional training. He addressed graduates with perspective earned through direct experience of captivity and tactical success. You've trained using doctrine developed from real operations where proper application meant difference between survival and death. Lieutenant Chun proved that specialist training creates genuine advantage when employed aggressively and intelligently. Your responsibility is maintaining that standard so future soldiers benefit from lessons we learn through experience you'll hopefully never face personally. Hassan's sentencing occurred during Chen's third month at training command, the tribunal imposing life imprisonment without parole for his documented war crimes. The sentence reflected both punishment for his actions and strategic calculation that his continued detention served deterrent purposes more effectively than execution would have achieved. Hassan's final statement to the tribunal maintained his position that American capability was mythology, but his words carried no weight against comprehensive evidence of his operational failure and subsequent conviction. Colonel Reeves attended sentencing with other victims' families, their presence providing witness to justice achieved through Chen's survival and testimony. After proceedings concluded, Reeves sought out Chen to deliver message that carried weight beyond personal gratitude. Lieutenant, my son died because Hassan underestimated what happens when you target American soldiers for psychological warfare. Your survival and tactical success ensured no other families will lose sons to Hassan's operations. The training you're developing protects soldiers my son never met. That's legacy he would have honored. Chun accepted Reeves' words with recognition that her role had evolved beyond individual operations into institutional impact, affecting thousands of soldiers. Hassan had captured her intending to demonstrate American vulnerability. Instead, his operation had catalyzed training revolution, strategic deterrence throughout the region, and legal accountability that honored his victims while protecting future personnel. The transformation from tactical survivor to strategic influencer carried responsibilities that extended far beyond personal mission accomplishment. Training Command expanded Chen's curriculum to additional specialist programs based on demonstrated effectiveness of tactical reversal doctrine. Psychological warfare techniques she'd employed against Hassan's hunters became standard instruction across reconnaissance, survival, and resistance programs. Her mountain defensive operations were simulated in training scenarios that taught specialists how terrain preparation multiplied effectiveness against numerically superior forces. The compound infiltration became case study in offensive action during apparent defensive crisis. 6 months after her reassignment, Chen received promotion to captain with assignment as deputy commander for specialist training development. The position formalized her authority to shape doctrine across multiple programs, while recognizing her contributions had strategic value beyond single curriculum. Davies delivered promotion orders with assessment that captured institutional perspective. Captain Chun, Hassan tried to prove training was propaganda. You proved it was life-saving preparation. Your new role ensures that preparation reaches maximum number of soldiers who will face unconventional threats requiring exactly the capabilities you demonstrated. Morrison's squad completed their operational rotation and received reassignment to training cadre positions where their direct experience complemented Chen's curriculum development. The team whose survival had validated specialist training would now multiply that validation through teaching future generations. Morrison accepted his instructor assignment with perspective earned through shared crisis. We survived Hassan's operation through discipline and Lieutenant Chen's tactical excellence. Now we ensure other soldiers receive training that makes survival more likely and tactical excellence more achievable. Rodriguez continued tracking strategic impact of Hassan's conviction and Chen's tactical performance through intelligence analysis, showing sustained behavioral changes across insurgent networks. His quarterly report documented persistent reduction in capture attempts, explicit enemy discussion of American specialist capabilities as genuine threat requiring operational caution, and systematic abandonment of psychological warfare demonstrations targeting military personnel. The report concluded that Chen's individual tactical success had created strategic deterrent effect equivalent to major force deployment. Matthews convened senior leadership conference examining broader lessons from Hassan's operation and subsequent institutional response. His presentation emphasized how single well-trained specialist tactical excellence under impossible conditions had influenced enemy behavior, validated training investments, and generated doctrine improvements benefiting thousands of soldiers. The multiplication factor demonstrated that individual capability, when properly employed and systematically studied, created strategic advantage far exceeding the immediate tactical victory. Chen participated in conference as subject matter expert, her presence representing transition from operational employment to institutional leadership. She presented training outcomes showing specialists graduated under modified doctrine performed measurably better in realistic scenarios than previous generations. The aggressive employment emphasis, psychological warfare integration, and tactical reversal doctrine she developed were producing soldiers who viewed survival situations as offensive opportunities rather than defensive crises. The conference concluded with recognition that Hassan's operation, despite its criminal intent and tragic previous victims, had inadvertently strengthened American capability through lessons extracted from Chen's tactical success. Training was enhanced, doctrine was refined, enemy behavior was modified, and future soldiers would benefit from knowledge purchased through disciplined performance under extreme conditions. Hassan had wanted to demonstrate American vulnerability. Instead, his operation had catalyzed improvements that made vulnerability significantly less likely. 1 year after her capture, Chun stood at specialist training facility watching new candidates navigate scenario modeled on Hassan's mountain operations. The candidates employed techniques she demonstrated: rapid terrain preparation, aggressive psychological warfare, systematic weapon acquisition, and calculated engagement that transformed numerical disadvantage into tactical advantage. Their performance validated the reproducibility of her tactical approach while honoring the experience that had made training development possible. Davies joined her observation position with assessment that captured the transformation her experience had enabled. Captain Chun, every specialist who graduates this program carries techniques you proved under actual combat conditions. Hassan captured you intending to demonstrate that training was mythology. You proved training was precisely calibrated preparation for exactly the scenarios we face. Now hundreds of soldiers receive that preparation informed by your direct experience rather than theoretical doctrine. Chun watched candidates complete their scenario with tactical success that would have seemed exceptional before Hassan's operation, but now represented achievable standard. The institutional multiplication of capability through training meant her tactical excellence was being reproduced across entire specialist community. Hassan had released her, believing she was prey for his psychological demonstration. She'd proven she was weapon that dismantled everything he'd built. Now she was teacher, ensuring future soldiers possessed capabilities that would protect them from threats Hassan's operation had represented. Morrison approached with news that Hassan had died in detention facility from natural causes, his life sentence ending after 14 months imprisonment. The former insurgent commander's death closed final chapter on operations that had killed 3 American soldiers and attempted to kill 4 more. Hassan's legacy was comprehensive failure. His psychological warfare strategy abandoned, his fighters scattered or detained, his demonstration reversed into validation of everything he'd tried to disprove, and his final months spent in prison for war crimes his own documentation had proved beyond doubt. Chun received the news with professional detachment that acknowledged justice had been served through legal process rather than personal vengeance. Hassan had underestimated American capability based on pride and miscalculation. That error had cost him everything while inadvertently strengthening the capabilities he'd attempted to undermine. His death ended his personal story, but the lessons extracted from his operational failure would influence military training for generations. The specialist candidates completed their final evaluation and assembled for graduation recognition. Chin addressed them with words informed by direct experience of scenarios their training had prepared them to survive. You've learned doctrine developed from real operations where proper application meant difference between tactical success and catastrophic failure. Hassan believed specialist training was mythology that would fail under pressure. Your graduation proves training creates reproducible capability when properly taught and aggressively employed. Your responsibility is maintaining that standard through disciplined preparation and tactical excellence. Davies concluded ceremony with broader perspective that connected individual training to strategic impact. Hassan's operation demonstrated enemy willingness to target American soldiers for psychological warfare purposes. Captain Chin's tactical success demonstrated that proper training defeats those operations while creating strategic deterrent that protects soldiers beyond immediate engagement. Your graduation represents multiplication of that protective capability across entire specialist community. After ceremony concluded, Chun walked training facility grounds with Morrison, their conversation reflecting on transformation from field squad to institutional instructors. The sergeant spoke observation that captured their shared evolution. We went from victims of Hassan's ambush to survivors of his operation to witnesses at his trial to instructors teaching others how to survive similar threats. Each phase multiplied impact of our experience beyond individual survival. Chin nodded agreement while watching new specialist candidates begin their training cycle. Hassan released me, believing I was prey for psychological demonstration. I proved training creates weapons that survive impossible conditions and dismantle enemy operations from inside. Now we're ensuring thousands of future specialists receive preparation that transforms survival from unlikely outcome to achievable standard through disciplined application of proven doctrine. The evening sun cast long shadows across training facility as Chin reviewed next cycle's curriculum modifications. Hassan's operation had taught its lessons comprehensively, though not the lessons he'd intended. American specialist training worked exactly as designed, underestimating that training carried severe tactical and strategic consequences. Proper preparation combined with aggressive employment could transform any scenario into opportunity for mission success. And individual tactical excellence when systematically studied and institutionally applied, created strategic advantage that protected soldiers for generations beyond the immediate operation. Hassan had wanted to prove American soldiers were vulnerable prey for psychological warfare. Instead, he'd proven they were weapons that fought back with devastating effectiveness when properly trained and aggressively employed. Chun had become that weapon through disciplined application of specialist doctrine. Now she ensured future soldiers would possess capabilities that made Hassan's demonstration impossible to repeat. The legacy wasn't personal glory, but institutional improvement that honored Hassan's victims while protecting countless soldiers who would never know how training purchased through tactical excellence under impossible circumstances had saved their lives by teaching enemies that targeting American specialists for demonstrations was operational decision guaranteed to end in comprehensive failure and severe consequences. What challenges have you overcome that taught you lessons worth sharing with others? How has your experience, whether military service or civilian expertise, shaped your understanding of preparation, discipline, and the difference between theoretical knowledge and practical application under pressure?